In this video, we'll be breaking down 3 hours of the darkest Rick and Morty facts to fall asleep to. Let's get started. First up, we got, the Ricks must be crazy. Rick Sanchez operates his flying car using what might be the most elaborate and morally questionable power source in the multiverse. Inside his car battery exists an entire planet with billions of intelligent beings who generate electricity for him, completely unaware that their entire civilization exists solely to keep his vehicle running. When the battery stops working during a trip to an alternate Earth, Rick and Morty have to shrink down and enter the microverse to fix the problem, revealing the full scope of this disturbing setup. The planet inside Rick's battery didn't evolve naturally. Rick created it himself using incredibly advanced technology. He put what he calls a spatially tessellated void inside a modified temporal field and waited until a planet developed intelligent life. This means he essentially created a pocket universe, compressed it down to fit inside a battery, and manipulated time to speed up evolution until creatures smart enough to generate power appeared. The process took what would have been billions of years in normal time, but Rick's temporal field made it happen much faster from his perspective. Once intelligent life evolved on this planet, Rick introduced himself as an alien visitor and gave them technology called Google Boxes. These devices generate electricity when people stomp on them, and the entire civilization built their society around this gift. They have homes powered by Google Boxes, businesses that run on Google Box electricity, and their entire infrastructure depends on people constantly stomping these devices. The citizens see this as normal work, paying each other for their labor, and building what looks like a functioning economy. They even created a holiday called Ricksgiving to honor the alien who gave them this technology. What these people don't know is that their power doesn't stay on their planet. Rick designed the Google Boxes to channel most of the generated electricity out of their universe and into his car engine. They believe they're generating power for themselves, storing waste energy in a disposal volcano, when really, they're just batteries in Rick's vehicle. Every time someone stomps a Google Box to power their home or charge their phone, they're actually helping Rick drive around and keeping his own phone charged. The entire planet works constantly, generation after generation, while Rick benefits from their labor without them having any clue about the truth. When Morty realizes what's happening, he immediately calls it slavery. Rick dismisses this by explaining that the people work for each other, pay each other money, buy houses, get married, and have children who replace them when they get too old to generate power. He argues this makes it a society, not slavery. Morty responds that it just sounds like slavery with extra steps, which makes Rick mock him by suggesting he'll get laid in college for having such naive political opinions. Rick genuinely doesn't see the moral problem with creating an entire civilization just to exploit their labor. Or maybe he sees it and simply doesn't care. The situation gets even darker when Rick and Morty arrive on the planet and discover it's having a power crisis. The microverse's most brilliant scientist, a man named Zeep Zanflorp, has invented a new energy source that makes Google Boxes obsolete. Zeep created his own miniverse, which is essentially the same thing Rick did but one level smaller. Inside Zeep's miniverse exists another planet with another civilization, and Zeep gave these people devices called flubal cranks. When they turn the cranks, they generate electricity that gets channeled out of their universe to power Zeep's world. Zeep takes 80% of the energy his miniverse produces, leaving only 20% for the people actually doing the work. Rick is furious when he sees this, but not because Zeep is exploiting another civilization. Rick is angry because Zeep's invention means the microverse won't need Google Boxes anymore, which means they won't be generating power for Rick's car battery. He pretends to be outraged about the ethics of creating a universe full of enslaved people, calling it unethical and not cool. Zeep tries to defend himself using the exact same logic Rick used earlier, explaining that the people in his miniverse work for each other in exchange for money. Rick throws his own words back at him, saying that just sounds like slavery with extra steps. Zeep responds with his universe's version of Rick's earlier insult, saying someone's going to get laid in college. Morty points out the obvious hypocrisy, asking Rick why he's telling Zeep that creating a miniverse is unethical when Rick created the microverse using identical methods. Rick admits Morty is right, but explains he actually has a plan. He knows that somewhere in Zeep's miniverse, there must be another scientist working on an even smaller universe. If they can find this person, their invention will make Zeep's Flubel cranks obsolete, which will force Zeep to admit that creating enslaved universes is wrong. Once Zeep realizes he's being a hypocrite, his people will go back to using Google boxes, and Rick's car battery will start working again. Rick's plan works exactly as predicted. Inside Zeep's miniverse lives a scientist named Kyle, who is developing something he calls a teenverse. Kyle created his own pocket universe with another planet and another civilization, planning to give them devices called Blubel Yanks. When they pull these pulley-based mechanisms, they'll generate energy that Kyle will harvest, taking most of it for himself, while the people believe they're just powering their own world. Kyle hasn't finished accelerating his temporal field yet, so the teenyverse doesn't have intelligent life, but he's close to completing the technology. When Zeep sees Kyle's teenyverse, he's horrified. He tells Kyle this is wrong, that creating a planet of slaves is unethical. Kyle defends himself the same way Zeep and Rick did, explaining the people won't be slaves because they'll work for each other and pay each other money. Zeep starts to repeat Rick's line about slavery with extra steps, but stops mid-sentence as he realizes what's happening. He turns to Rick and asks if Rick created his universe, if his microverse is actually just another layer in this nested system of exploitation. This leads to a massive fight between Rick and Zeep. Rick confirms that yes, he created Zeep's universe, and yes, Zeep and his entire civilization exist only to power Rick's car. Zeep is devastated. Kyle, the teenyverse scientist, realizes that Zeep came from a miniverse, which means Kyle himself was born in a teenyverse, which means his entire life is part of this nested exploitation system. Kyle mentions that his father died and he couldn't make time for the funeral because he was too busy working on his universe, which is darkly ironic since his father's entire existence was also meaningless in the grand scheme of things. Rick and Zeep start physically fighting, calling each other names and arguing about who created who. Rick yells that Zeep is his battery and that's all he is. Zeep shoots back that Rick made his universe, so Rick is responsible for creating someone smarter than himself. Rick claims he created a universe of idiots. The fight escalates until Kyle's teenyverse gets destroyed in the chaos, trapping Rick, Zeep, and Morty on Kyle's planet with no way to escape. The planet is prehistoric, with dangerous wildlife and primitive conditions. Morty tries to escape the situation by going to live with the Tree People, a primitive tribe on the planet. Rick warns him the Tree People will eat him after sundown, but Morty insists this is a myth and leaves anyway. Rick and Zeep continue fighting and trying to kill each other with primitive weapons while stranded on this world. Neither of them cares that Kyle's entire civilization just got destroyed or that they're trapped in a prehistoric hellscape. They only care about their rivalry and proving who's smarter. Several months pass on Kyle's planet, though much less time passes in the larger universes due to time moving at different speeds. Morty becomes the leader of the Tree People, though he's absolutely miserable. When Rick and Zeep find him, Morty is wearing primitive clothing and speaking the Tree People's language. He pretends to be enlightened and spiritual, telling Rick and Zeep they've learned nothing and should come with him to see the spirit tree. Once he gets them alone, Morty drops the act and desperately begs them to work together and get him home. He reveals the Tree People are backwards savages who eat every third baby because they think it makes fruit grow bigger. Everyone smells like urine constantly, and he's so desperate for any kind of stimulation that he masturbated to an extra curvy piece of driftwood. Morty forces Rick and Zeep to cooperate by threatening them with the Tree People's weapons. They reluctantly agree to work together to build a way out of the teenyverse. As they collaborate on building a portal device, they actually start to bond. Rick compliments Zeep's proto-recombinator skills, and Zeep admits Rick is decent at ionic cell dioxination. They joke about going for drinks together, with Rick mentioning he's an alcoholic and Zeep revealing he's an opium addict. For a brief moment, it seems like they might become friends, but as soon as they finish building the portal device, Zeep betrays Rick. He suggests going for that drink and offers to grab his wallet from his ship. Rick immediately realizes this is a trap because the ship also contains Zeep's transporter, and time moves much slower in the microverse than in the miniverse. Zeep could spend hours or days preparing an attack while only seconds pass for Rick. Zeep confirms Rick's suspicion by trying to get back to his ship first so he can destroy Rick's microverse battery, which would kill billions of people but would also defeat Rick. Rick and Zeep race through the miniverse trying to reach their respective ships first. Rick tells Morty that Zeep is psychotic and willing to risk everything he cares about just to win their rivalry. They fight their way through Zeep's civilization, with Rick shouting at random citizens that their existence is a lie and nothing they do matters. One secretary he tells this to starts having an existential crisis right in the middle of her workday. Rick doesn't care about the psychological damage he's causing because he's too focused on beating Zeep. The chase continues into the microverse, where Rick and Zeep fight while racing toward Rick's ship. Rick gains the upper hand and brutally beats Zeep, telling him he still has some learning to do even though he quit school. Rick leaves Zeep broken and defeated on the ground. Before Rick escapes back to his car, Zeep makes one final choice. He could try to destroy the microverse battery out of spite, but he realizes that would be pointless. If the battery is destroyed, Rick just throws it away, and Zeep's entire universe dies. If the battery works, Zeep and everyone he knows continues existing as Rick's power source. Zeep chooses to keep his universe alive and keep generating power for Rick, giving Rick the middle finger as he leaves, a gesture Rick taught the microverse people while claiming it meant peace among worlds. Back in the normal universe, Morty is confused because the battery seems to be working fine. Rick explains that Zeep understood the situation perfectly. Once Rick returned to his car, either the battery would be broken and Rick would throw it away, killing everyone, or it would work and they'd all survive as Rick's slaves. Zeep chose survival for his people over pride. Rick drives off to get ice cream, completely satisfied with the outcome. He just forced an entire civilization to accept eternal enslavement, traumatized countless people, destroyed at least one universe completely, and caused who knows how many deaths during his fight with Zeep, all because his car battery stopped working. The episode reveals something deeply disturbing about Rick's character. He has the scientific ability to create entire universes filled with billions of conscious beings, and he uses this godlike power to avoid the minor inconvenience of charging his car battery through conventional means. Every person in the microverse lives their entire life, loves their family, works their job, and dies without ever knowing their existence, serves someone else's trivial needs. They celebrate Rick's giving and teach their children about the great alien who gave them technology, never realizing that alien sees them as nothing more than organic batteries. Even worse, Rick knows exactly what he's doing. When Morty calls it slavery, Rick doesn't deny the comparison. He just adds extra steps to make it seem like a normal society. Rick understands that creating conscious beings for the sole purpose of exploiting their labor is morally wrong, which is why he gets so angry when Zeep does the same thing. But Rick's anger isn't about ethics or morality. He's only upset because Zeep's miniverse threatens Rick's power supply. The moment Zeep's invention becomes a problem for Rick, suddenly Rick cares deeply about the immorality of enslaving universes. This hypocrisy extends to every level of the nested universes. Rick exploits the microverse, Zeep exploits the miniverse, and Kyle was planning to exploit the teenverse. Each scientist uses the exact same justification, claiming the people work for money and have normal lives, so it's not really slavery. Each scientist sees themselves as a benefactor, giving primitive people the gift of electricity. None of them acknowledge that they're creating entire civilizations specifically to harvest their labor, while giving them just enough freedom to make the exploitation seem voluntary. The situation is made even more horrific by the time dilation between universes. What feels like minutes in the normal universe equals hours in the microverse, days in the miniverse, and months in the teenverse. This means the suffering and exploitation happens on a vastly accelerated timescale for the people trapped inside. While Rick drives around for a few hours, generations could be living and dying inside his battery, spending their entire lives stomping Google boxes to power a vehicle they'll never see for a person who doesn't care if they exist. Rick keeps his car battery functioning through a combination of technological superiority and mutually assured destruction. The people in the microverse can't escape or rebel because they don't know they're trapped. Zeep knows the truth, but can't do anything about it because any attempt to stop powering Rick's car means Rick throws away the battery and everyone dies. It's a perfect prison where the inmates don't know they're imprisoned, and the one person who figures it out realizes that resistance means extinction. Rick has created a system where an entire universe has no choice but to serve him, and he did it just so he wouldn't have to plug his car into a charging station. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Roy, the arcade simulation where Rick experiences an entire alternate human life. Rick Sanchez treats human consciousness as casual entertainment. At an intergalactic arcade called Blips and Chits, he plays a virtual reality game called Roy, where players experience an entire human lifetime from birth to death in what feels like real time to the person inside the simulation. The game isn't just graphics on a screen. When someone puts on the Roy helmet, they actually live decades of subjective experience, feeling every emotion, forming real memories, and experiencing what seems like a complete human existence before snapping back to reality seconds later. Morty puts on the Roy helmet without understanding what he's getting into. The game immediately transports his consciousness into the body of a young boy named Roy Parsons, who wakes up terrified from a nightmare. In the dream, Roy remembers an old man putting a helmet on his head, which is actually Morty's real memory bleeding through into the simulation. Roy's mother dismisses it as fever-induced and tells him to get sleep because he has school on Monday. This marks the beginning of Morty living an entire alternate life. The simulation progresses through Roy's childhood and teenage years. Roy attends school where a teacher tells the class to think about their futures, explaining that this is the time in their lives when anything is possible. Roy looks out the window and sees other kids playing football, smiling as he imagines that future for himself. The game then jumps forward to Roy as a young adult playing competitive football. An announcer describes Roy making a spectacular catch and running down the field for a touchdown, while a girl in the stands watches him. Roy makes eye contact with this girl during his moment of athletic triumph, and she becomes his future wife. Time continues moving forward in the simulation. Roy is now married to the girl from the football game, and they have a young son together. They sit at the dinner table, eating as a family, when Roy's wife suggests he should talk to her father about working at the carpet store. She tells Roy it's time to get realistic about his future, implying his football career either ended or never became professional. Roy seems distant during this conversation, already feeling the weight of abandoning his dreams for practical employment. The simulation shows Roy working at his father-in-law's carpet store, a mundane job far removed from his athletic ambitions. While working there, he receives a phone call from his doctor asking him to come in. The scene shifts to the doctor's office, where Roy learns he has cancer. The doctor tells Roy they should have caught it sooner, but hindsight is 20/20, and what's important now is moving quickly with treatment. This devastating diagnosis happens in the middle of Roy's life, threatening to cut his simulated existence short before he's even reached old age. Roy undergoes cancer treatment and survives. His wife wheels him into their house after his surgery, where friends and family have gathered to celebrate his recovery. A banner reading "Cancer Can't Beat the Rocket" hangs in the room, referencing Roy's old football nickname. Everyone applauds as Roy enters, marking his survival as a major life victory. The simulation captures the relief and joy of beating a terminal illness, making Roy's recovery feel like a second chance at life. Years pass in the simulation, and Roy continues working at the carpet store. He's now much older with gray hair and glasses. Having spent decades in this job he never really wanted. A customer thanks him for selling them carpet, and Roy sits down at his desk looking fondly at a trophy that reads, "World's Greatest Dad." Despite not achieving his athletic dreams, Roy found meaning in fatherhood and built a life around his family. He seems content in this moment, having made peace with how his life turned out. Someone shouts from off-screen asking Roy to pull some Persian off-white shag carpets for a clearance sale. Roy gets up and steps onto a short ladder to retrieve the rugs from a high shelf. He loses his balance on the ladder and falls, hitting the ground hard. The impact kills him instantly. Text reading "Game Over" appears on screen as Roy's simulated life ends abruptly in a workplace accident at the carpet store, the same place his wife suggested he work decades earlier in the game. Morty suddenly regains consciousness back at the arcade and rips off the helmet, completely disoriented and terrified. He frantically asks where he is and what happened, his mind still trapped in the decades he just experienced as Roy. He looks around desperately asking where his wife is, genuinely believing he was married and lived an entire life. The transition back to reality is jarring and traumatic, as Morty struggles to remember that he's actually a teenage boy named Morty, not an elderly man named Roy who just died falling off a ladder. Rick is completely casual about the whole experience. He tells Morty he scored 55 years, which isn't bad, but criticizes Morty for wasting his 30s with a birdwatching phase. Rick talks about Roy's entire simulated lifetime like it's just a game score, showing zero concern for the psychological impact of living and dying in virtual reality. When Morty asks about his wife, Rick dismissively reminds him it was just a game and he needs to snap out of it, handing Morty the tickets he won. Morty, still processing the trauma of experiencing death and losing decades of memories, remembers why they came to the arcade in the first place. He angrily reminds Rick that he sold a gun to a hitman who kills people for money. Rick barely acknowledges this moral concern, instead mocking Morty's choices in the game. Rick points out that Morty beat cancer and then went back to work at the carpet store, saying "boo," as if this was a disappointing gameplay strategy rather than a human life choice. Rick sits down to play Roy himself, completely ignoring Morty's ethical arguments about selling weapons to assassins. Morty continues trying to make Rick understand that selling a gun to a killer is the same as pulling the trigger yourself. Rick argues this is the same as doing nothing because if the assassin Krombopulos Michael wants someone dead, nobody can stop him anyway, which is why he does it professionally. Rick then puts on the Roy helmet, ready to beat Morty's score by making better life choices in the simulation. Morty keeps arguing that Rick could stop a killing from happening and that selling the gun was wrong, but Rick could undo it if he wanted. Rick responds that this is the difference between them, claiming he never goes back to the carpet store. This statement has multiple meanings. Literally, Rick is saying he won't waste his Roy gameplay on a boring job like Morty did. Metaphorically, Rick is saying he doesn't dwell on past mistakes or make conventional, safe choices. He lives without regret or moral second-guessing, unlike Morty, who makes cautious decisions. While Rick plays Roy, other alien patrons at the arcade start gathering around to watch his gameplay. One alien shouts in amazement that Rick is taking Roy off the grid, meaning Rick's version of Roy doesn't have a social security number. Rick is playing the game in a completely unconventional way, probably avoiding normal society entirely and living as some kind of outlaw or hermit. Other aliens gasp and crowd around to watch this unusual strategy, treating Rick's gameplay as something remarkable worth observing. The game reveals something deeply disturbing about how Rick views consciousness and existence. To him, an entire human lifetime with all its joys, struggles, relationships, and death is just entertainment. Roy experiences real love, real fear of mortality, real grief over abandoned dreams, and real death. For the person inside the helmet, those 55 years feel completely authentic. They form genuine emotional attachments, make difficult life choices, and suffer real psychological consequences. But to Rick, it's just a way to kill time at an arcade while arguing with Morty about whether selling weapons to murderers is morally wrong. The casual cruelty of the Roy game extends beyond just Rick's attitude. The entire arcade is filled with aliens treating simulated human lifetimes as disposable entertainment. The game is popular enough to have a sequel, Roy 2, which gets mentioned later. This means the technology to create fully realized conscious experiences and then delete them is so common and unremarkable that it's just another arcade machine next to other games. Thousands or millions of simulated human lives are lived and discarded daily across the galaxy for fun. What makes Roy particularly dark is that the simulated person has no idea they're in a game. Young Roy has a nightmare about an old man putting a helmet on him, which is the player's real memory bleeding through, but Roy's mother dismisses it and Roy forgets about it. He goes through his entire life believing he's real, that his choices matter, that his relationships are genuine. He experiences the disappointment of unfulfilled dreams, the terror of cancer, the triumph of survival, the quiet satisfaction of fatherhood, and finally sudden death in a workplace accident. None of it was real, but Roy had no way of knowing that. The game also raises questions about the nature of consciousness and suffering. If Roy feels like a real person with real emotions and real experiences, does it matter that he's simulated? When Morty lived as Roy for 55 subjective years, were those experiences less valid than his real life? Morty genuinely believed he was married and had built a life. The love he felt for his simulated wife and the grief of losing that life when he woke up were real emotions happening in Morty's brain. The game created authentic suffering in the name of entertainment. Rick's gameplay approach reveals even more about his philosophy. Instead of living a normal simulated life like Morty did, Rick immediately breaks all the rules and takes Roy completely off the grid. Rick refuses to participate in conventional society, even in a simulation where nothing matters and there are no real consequences. He can't even pretend to be a normal person playing by society's rules when it's literally just a game. This compulsive rejection of authority and structure defines Rick's character so completely that it overrides even the simple goal of experiencing a different life. The Roy game appears again later in the episode when another alien mentions that Roy too just arrived at the arcade. This sequel presumably offers new scenarios and different life paths to experience, treating human existence as content to be updated and improved with new versions. The casual mention of Roy 2 suggests these simulated lifetimes are mass-produced entertainment products, with developers creating new human experiences for aliens to consume and discard. Morty's experience in Roy leaves him visibly shaken and confused, struggling to reorient himself to reality after decades of simulated life. But Rick shows no concern for this psychological trauma. He doesn't warn Morty about what he's getting into, doesn't help him process the experience afterward, and immediately jumps in to play himself. Rick sees consciousness as something to be manipulated and discarded for entertainment, whether it's simulated humans in an arcade game or real civilizations trapped in his car battery. The episode uses Roy to comment on how Rick views all existence. If simulated humans in a video game can feel real emotions and live complete lives, what makes them different from the real people Rick encounters? From Rick's perspective, as someone who can create universes and manipulate reality, everyone might as well be an NPC in someone else's game. This nihilistic worldview lets Rick justify any action because nothing really matters if existence itself is arbitrary and consciousness is just another form of entertainment to be consumed and discarded. Roy is Rick's philosophy condensed into an arcade game, where entire lives mean nothing more than a high score to beat. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Next, we have Rick's secret memory room, where he stores erased traumas and suppressed experiences. Rick Sanchez maintains a secret underground archive where he stores memories he's erased from Morty's mind. The room is filled with thousands of vials containing traumatic, disturbing, or psychologically damaging experiences that Morty begged Rick to remove because they were driving him insane. Rick casually calls this collection Morty's Mind Blowers and uses it as entertainment, watching the erased memories like television episodes whenever he gets bored. The existence of this archive reveals that Morty has suffered countless traumas he can't remember, and Rick has been secretly editing his grandson's mind for years. The episode opens with Morty unable to stop thinking about something called the truth tortoise, a creature whose eyes reveal absolute knowledge about everything. Rick warned Morty not to look into its eyes, but Morty did anyway, and now can't handle the information flooding his brain. When Morty wishes Rick could just erase the memory, Rick reveals he's been doing exactly that for a long time. He opens a hidden hatch in his garage, leading to a massive circular chamber filled with color-coded vials, each containing a different erased memory. Rick organizes the memories using 3 color codes. Blue vials contain memories Morty asked to have removed. Purple vials hold memories that Morty's family caused, traumatic events involving Beth, Summer, or Jerry that were too painful to remember. Red vials are experiences Rick himself wanted erased from Morty's mind for reasons Rick refuses to explain. This color coding system means Rick has been secretly managing what Morty remembers about his own life, deciding which experiences are too dangerous or inconvenient for his grandson to retain. The archive also contains a large chair with a helmet device that lets them watch the erased memories like videos. Rick admits this isn't the first time they've done this. There's no dust on the vials because Rick and Morty have repeatedly gone through this same cycle where Morty asks to see his erased memories, watches them, gets traumatized again, and then asks Rick to erase the knowledge that the memory archive exists. They're trapped in an endless loop of forgetting and rediscovering this horrible truth. One erased memory shows Morty looking at the moon through a telescope and seeing what appears to be a man standing on the lunar surface. The figure stares directly at Morty and smiles sinisterly. Morty tells his family he saw someone on the moon, but everyone dismisses him. Rick claims he's been to 300 versions of Earth's moon and never seen any regular person hanging out there. Summer suggests it's just a smudge on the telescope lens, which makes Morty absolutely furious. He screams at her that he knows the difference between a man threatening him and a smudge on the lens. The next day at school, Principal Vagina introduces a new guidance counselor named Mr. Lunas, who matches the description of the moon man Morty saw. Lunas makes a creepy comment about students shooting for the moon while staring at Morty, confirming Morty's suspicions. That night, Morty follows Lunas through the suburbs and photographs him planting a tattered American flag on someone's front lawn, believing this proves Lunas came from the moon, where the Apollo mission left a flag. Morty shows the evidence to Principal Vagina, who completely misunderstands the situation. Vagina thinks Morty is using "lives on the moon" as code language to report that Lunas is a pedophile. He confronts Lunas, punches him, and orders him to leave the school. Vagina tells Morty he doesn't care if Lunas is from the moon or not, that guy likes them young. The principal genuinely believes he's protecting students from a predator based on Morty's moon accusations. Shortly after, Morty sees police investigating the front lawn where Lunas planted the flag, with an ambulance driving away from the scene. Later, Morty watches from behind bushes as 3 Marines hold a funeral for Gordon Lunas. One Marine explains they don't know what drove Lunas to take his own life, but they want to remember good things about him, like how from certain angles some people would say he looked like a smudge. Morty realizes with absolute horror that the Moon Man was actually just a smudge on his telescope lens the entire time. Morty runs home and looks through the telescope again, seeing the smudge through the full moon. He touches the lens and confirms his terrible mistake. Morty screams about what he's done, realizing he caused an innocent man's suicide. His paranoid accusations led Principal Vagina to publicly humiliate and assault Lunas, destroying his reputation by calling him a pedophile. Unable to live with the false accusations and social destruction, Lunas killed himself. Morty's inability to distinguish between a lens smudge and a real person directly resulted in someone's death. Another memory shows Morty captured by an alien warlord who tells Beth she must choose which of her children lives. The warlord understands that children are everything to mammals and will spare one life, but Beth must decide. Both Summer and Morty are restrained and terrified. Without hesitation, Beth chooses Summer. She doesn't even pause to consider, immediately picking her daughter over her son. The memory cuts off before showing what happened next, but the trauma of hearing his mother instantly choose his sister's life over his was severe enough that Morty asked Rick to erase it. One memory involves Morty getting possessed by an alien creature called Voltimatron, who announces that Morty is gone and he now controls the body. The family desperately tries to save Morty by telling him they love him, believing love will help him fight the possession. Rick admits he can be mean, but says he loves Morty and knows Morty is stronger than all of them. Beth and Summer also declare their love, begging Morty to fight the creature inside him. The problem is, the alien takes the form of a massive worm-like parasite, visibly protruding from Morty's body. The family has to keep expressing love while looking at this disgusting creature emerging from Morty's stomach. Summer mentions she has somewhere to be at 6. Rick struggles to maintain the loving expression while looking at the grotesque sight. Someone asks if they should pull the worm out, but Rick says not to touch it, just keep loving Morty. The family members start making disgusted comments, apologizing, and struggling to continue the emotional support while confronted with this horrible visual. Another erased memory shows Rick and Morty on a freezing planet where temperatures drop to 300 degrees below zero at sunset. Rick says they'll freeze to death in seconds and need shelter. Morty suggests a cave, but Rick dismisses this as movie logic, saying a cave won't work. Instead, Rick announces they have to use Bibo. Bibo is apparently a friendly alien creature who helped them find water. Morty protests that Bibo is their friend, but Rick insists Bibo won't even feel it and they need to get inside Bibo's body for warmth. The memory shows Morty screaming in horror as Rick kills or cuts open Bibo, forcing Morty to climb inside the creature's corpse for shelter from the deadly cold. They brace for the ice limit as temperatures plummet. Then Rick suddenly asks if they're on Venzanulan 9 or Venzanulan 7, suggesting he might have been wrong about the temperature danger. The memory ends before revealing if they actually needed to kill Bibo or if Rick made a mistake about which planet they were on. Either way, the trauma of being forced inside a dead friend was severe enough for removal. One memory reveals that Rick has been saying, "take things for granted," instead of "take things for granted" his entire life. After they lose someone named Captain Sky in an uprising against an oppressive regime, Rick makes a solemn comment about how it makes you think and you shouldn't take things for granted. Morty realizes Rick is saying granite like the rock instead of granted, and starts laughing at him. Rick gets defensive, and Morty mocks him by asking if he's a boulder person, a rock person, and how long he's been saying this wrong. Rick offers to erase Morty's memory of this embarrassment, which Morty agrees to, showing Rick will erase memories, just to avoid personal humiliation. Another memory shows Morty struggling to flip the correct light switch. Rick asks Morty to hit the leftmost switch by the door. Morty flips switches 3 times, and Rick points out he heard 3 distinct clicks. Rick deduces that Morty first flipped the wrong switch on the right, then hastily flipped the correct switch, then shamefully unflipped the initially flipped switch in the darkness. Morty admits that's basically what happened and apologizes. Rick's response to this minor mistake is absolutely psychotic. He tells Morty to grab a shovel and takes him outside. The memory shows Rick frantically looking for zip ties, then using some kind of technological device that creates horrible screaming sounds. The scene implies Rick is either killing people or causing massive destruction because Morty flipped a light switch wrong. The memory is fragmented and chaotic, suggesting whatever happened was too traumatic for even the archive to fully capture. One of the most disturbing memories involves squirrels. Rick gives Morty a device that lets him understand animal speech, warning Morty to stay out of trouble. Morty immediately uses it to listen to squirrels, hearing them talk about bringing food to their queen and how the queen makes babies. Then, Morty overhears squirrels discussing destabilizing Argentina's economy, refocusing labor class outrage, fostering a coup, and installing a compliant regime. The squirrels mention Uganda, chemtrails, and picking a new pope if their Exxon Monsanto plan falls through in Africa. The squirrels notice Morty can hear them. They stop their conversation and stare at him. One squirrel calls out asking if Morty can hear them, offering wishes and the ability to fly and get candy if he responds. They call for someone named Daphne to run a check on a possible Doolittle, meaning someone who can talk to animals. More squirrels start gathering, whistling to each other. Morty runs back to Rick in absolute terror. Rick immediately knows Morty messed with squirrels and panics. He shoots the squirrels with some kind of weapon, but tells Morty it will only keep them down for a little bit. Rick screams at Morty to pack his things because they have to abandon this entire reality and move to a new one. Rick explains he said they could only switch realities a couple of times, and now they're using up one of those precious chances because of squirrels. The memory reveals that squirrels secretly run Earth's geopolitical systems and cannot allow anyone who knows this truth to survive. The memory archive also contains experiences that aren't Morty's at all. Rick admits he sometimes edits memories or includes other people's perspectives to make them play better when watching them later. This means Rick isn't just erasing Morty's memories, but actively manipulating and falsifying them, creating false recollections or changing details to suit his entertainment preferences. Morty questions why he can see memories from times when he wasn't present, and Rick casually admits to editing them. The episode reveals multiple scenarios have happened in this archive room. There's a scenario 3 and a scenario 4, suggesting Rick has protocols for what to do when things go wrong during memory viewing sessions. At one point, both Rick and Morty forget who they are completely after watching too many erased memories. They have to figure out their relationship from context clues. A mysterious figure appears, realizes it's a scenario 4 situation, and shoots them both with tranquilizer darts while complaining about not getting paid enough for this. Rick keeps Jerry's memories too. There's a section called Jerry's Mind Blowers, containing memories Rick has erased from Jerry's mind without Jerry knowing or consenting. One memory shows the family trying to send an alien named Gobo home, with everyone working together on a plan that required Jerry to transport Gobo to a specific location. The family waits on a hill with their device ready to transport Gobo to Alpha Centauri. They're confident Jerry knows where to go and will arrive any second. Jerry shows up asking if it worked and if they got Gobo home. The family realizes Jerry still has Gobo and was supposed to bring him to the hill. Jerry thought Gobo was in someone else's basket or car. The alien they were trying to save apparently died because of Jerry's incompetence. By the end of the episode, both Rick and Morty have watched so many traumatic memories that they decide to commit suicide together. They can't handle knowing about all these erased experiences and see no point in continuing to exist if most of their experiences just end up in storage. They're about to shoot themselves when Summer walks in, triggering another scenario. The cycle resets, with memories of the suicide attempt presumably also erased. The archive represents Rick's ultimate control over Morty's identity and consciousness. Rick decides what Morty remembers, what defines Morty's personality, and what experiences shape who Morty becomes. Morty has died, killed people, made catastrophic mistakes, been betrayed by family, and suffered countless traumas he has no memory of because Rick erased them. Every conversation Morty has, every decision he makes, happens with massive gaps in his actual life experience. He's operating with an incomplete and manipulated understanding of his own existence, and Rick maintains this control deliberately. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Beth and the unsettling possibility that she showed sociopathic traits as a child. Rick Sanchez reveals that his daughter Beth was such a disturbing and potentially dangerous child that he built her an entire pocket dimension called Fruy to keep her isolated from other children. The episode exposes Beth's childhood psychology through a decades-old mystery involving a missing boy named Tommy Lipnip, showing that young Beth may have committed acts far darker than anyone in her family ever realized. Rick's inventions for childhood, Beth paint a picture of a girl with violent, controlling, and possibly murderous tendencies that her genius father enabled rather than addressed. The episode begins with news coverage of convicted child murderer Joseph Lipnip, scheduled for execution by lethal injection for allegedly killing and eating his son Tommy. Beth watches this news and laughs, remembering how she coped with Tommy's disappearance as a child by imagining he got lost in her imaginary world called Fruy. She treats this childhood fantasy as silly nostalgia until Rick gets offended and reveals Fruy wasn't imaginary at all. Rick actually built it as a real pocket dimension accessible through chalk drawings on walls, meaning Tommy could genuinely be trapped there after all these years. Beth realizes an innocent man is about to be executed for a murder that might never have happened. She and Rick enter Fruy to search for Tommy, and Beth immediately starts arguing with Rick about her childhood. She's angry that Rick kept her in this glorified chicken coop instead of letting her accompany him on adventures. This argument reveals the deeper issue underlying Fruy creation. Rick didn't build it as a fun play space, but as a containment facility to keep Beth away from other children and the outside world. Inside Fruy, Rick gets attacked by a giant mutated bird creature and its offspring. The bird tears off Rick's arm. Before he can fight it off using a mechanical replacement limb he quickly constructs. After defeating the birds, Rick and Beth discover something horrifying. The creatures in Fruy have been genetically modified using human DNA, which shouldn't be possible unless a human has been living in the dimension and deliberately creating these hybrid monsters. This confirms Tommy is not only alive, but has been conducting biological experiments for decades. Beth theorizes what happened based on the evidence. Tommy was trapped in Fruy as a child with no food source except the native creatures. To survive, he committed intercourse with the Fruy animals to produce offspring that were part human and part creature. He then ate his own children to stay alive, using his hybrid offspring as a renewable food source. Rick adds that the less appetizing children probably worship Tommy as their god, since he created them and controls their existence. Rick and Beth are soon captured by a group of human creature hybrids, who take them to see Tommy. Adult Tommy has become the Dimension's leader, ruling over the population of his own mutated children. He lives exactly as Rick predicted, committing both incest with his offspring and cannibalism to survive. Tommy has built an entire society around himself, where he is God, father, sexual partner, and predator to the creatures he created. This nightmare civilization has sustained itself for decades inside the pocket dimension Rick built. Tommy stages a play to tell Rick and Beth his version of events. The play reveals that Beth was responsible for trapping Tommy in Fruy in the first place. Young Beth pushed Tommy into the dimension and sealed the entrance, stranding him there deliberately. Tommy's play claims Beth did this out of jealousy because Tommy had a father who loved him. Beth dismisses the play as fake news, unwilling to accept responsibility for her actions. However, she doesn't actually deny pushing Tommy into Fruy, suggesting the accusation is true. After the play, Tommy decides to demonstrate how he sustains himself in Fruy preparing to show them his cannibalistic practices in detail. Rick is so disgusted, he immediately leaves, pulling Beth away before they have to witness Tommy eating his own children. Beth insists their adventure isn't over and they need to save Tommy, but Rick stops her to have a serious conversation about her childhood. Rick explains he kept Beth in Fruipyland because she was a terrifying child. He lists the items Beth asked him to invent when she was young, and the list reveals a deeply disturbing psychology. Beth requested a ray gun, a whip that forces people to like whoever holds it, invisibility handcuffs, a parent leg trap, a lightning gun, a teddy bear with anatomically correct innards, night vision, googly eyeglasses, sound erasing sneakers, false fingerprints, sleep darts, a lie-detecting doll, an indestructible baseball bat, a ladybug-shaped taser, a fake police badge, location tracking stickers, rainbow-colored duct tape, mind control hair clips, poison gum, and a pink sentient switchblade. These aren't normal childhood requests. They're tools for manipulation, violence, surveillance, and control. The whip that forces people to like the bearer shows Beth wanted to control others' emotions and relationships. Invisibility handcuffs suggest she wanted to restrain people without being detected. The parent leg trap implies she had violent thoughts toward authority figures, possibly her own parents. Sleep darts, poison gum, and tasers are weapons designed to harm or incapacitate other children. The fake police badge and false fingerprints indicate she planned to impersonate authority and hide her identity while committing acts she knew were wrong. The sound erasing sneakers and location tracking stickers reveal Beth's methodical approach to stalking or approaching victims silently. Mind control hair clips show she wanted to override other people's free will entirely. The lie-detecting doll suggests paranoia or a need to maintain control over information. An indestructible baseball bat is a weapon meant to last through repeated violent use. The anatomically correct teddy bear innards indicate a disturbing interest in biology and dissection, possibly of living things. Rick built all of these items for Beth. He enabled his daughter's dangerous tendencies by giving her exactly the tools she requested to harm, manipulate, and control other children. Instead of getting Beth psychological help or setting boundaries, Rick facilitated her worst impulses. When her requests became too concerning even for Rick, his solution wasn't intervention but isolation. He built Fruipyland as a prison disguised as a playground, somewhere Beth could act out her violent fantasies without hurting real children from their neighborhood. Beth tries to blame Rick for her actions, claiming she only asked for these disturbing inventions because she wanted Rick to spend more time with her. She argues she wasn't actually a dangerous child, but a lonely one, seeking her father's attention through the only means that seemed to work. This explanation doesn't account for what she actually did with the inventions once Rick made them, or why she specifically requested tools for violence and control rather than toys that would facilitate bonding. Beth decides to rescue Tommy despite everything, but when she confronts him, she refuses to apologize for trapping him in Fruipyland. Tommy refuses to leave without an apology and orders his hybrid children to attack Beth. This triggers something in Beth's psychology. She goes into what Rick describes as a defense-induced killing frenzy, slaughtering Tommy's children with brutal efficiency. The ease and enthusiasm with which adult Beth commits mass murder suggests this violent capability was always inside her, just waiting for the right trigger. Beth presumably kills Tommy during this rampage. She returns to Rick holding Tommy's severed finger, which they use to create an adult clone of Tommy using Rick's technology. They send the clone to live with Joseph Lipnip to prevent his execution, effectively framing the situation. So it appears Tommy ran away as a child and recently returned home. This saves Joseph from lethal injection, but leaves him living with a clone of his son who has no real memories of their relationship. The episode never confirms whether Beth actually killed other children before Fruipyland was built. The circumstantial evidence is disturbing. Rick felt the need to isolate Beth from other children using extreme measures. Tommy Lipnip disappeared under mysterious circumstances connected to Beth. Beth's requested inventions are perfectly suited for kidnapping, harming, or killing other kids while avoiding detection. Young Beth was jealous of children who had better family relationships than she did, providing motive. Rick enabled rather than stopped Beth's dangerous behavior by building her requested weapons. When Rick directly confronts Beth about her childhood, he doesn't call her creative or misunderstood. He calls her a scary child who made psychotic requests. Rick compares understanding Beth's psychology to understanding Charles Manson, a convicted mass murderer and cult leader. This comparison suggests Rick sees similar patterns of manipulation, violence, and lack of empathy in his daughter's childhood behavior. Rick has encountered countless alien threats and dimensional horrors, yet his own young daughter frightened him enough to build an entire pocket universe to contain her. Beth's response to this confrontation reveals her current psychology. She doesn't express horror at learning she was so disturbed that her father had to isolate her. She doesn't apologize for her childhood requests or actions. Instead, she deflects blame onto Rick, argues she was just seeking attention, and then immediately commits mass murder when Tommy's children attack her. The adult Beth shows the same lack of accountability and capacity for violence that characterized her childhood. Rick offers Beth a choice at the end of their conversation. She can leave her family to travel the cosmos and pursue her own interests, while Rick replaces her with a clone, or she can stay with her family and accept the life she's chosen. The clone would be indistinguishable from the real Beth, fooling Jerry and the children completely. This offer reveals Rick considers Beth's presence in the family optional and replaceable, and that he's willing to create a fake version of his daughter to maintain family stability. Beth's decision is deliberately left ambiguous. When Jerry and the kids return home, Beth displays unusually warm and attentive parenting behavior, seeming more engaged and present than normal. This sudden shift in personality could mean Beth chose to stay and is trying harder to appreciate her family, or it could mean Rick cloned her and the clone is performing the role of ideal mother that the real Beth never managed. The episode provides no definitive answer about which Beth is living with the family. The ambiguity serves a purpose beyond suspense. It doesn't actually matter whether Beth is real or cloned because her family can't tell the difference and wouldn't want to know. If Beth is a clone, she has all of the real Beth's memories and believes herself to be the original. If Beth is real, she's performing a version of motherhood that feels as artificial as a clone would. Either way, the Smith family continues functioning with a Beth who may or may not be the person they think she is, just as they've always lived with a Beth whose dark childhood remained hidden. The episode also reveals Rick's philosophy on parenting and accountability. He tells Beth essentially the same speech he gave Jerry in an earlier episode about how they don't take responsibility for their actions and lack morals. Rick recognizes these patterns in both his son-in-law and his daughter, but doesn't actually help them change. He offers technological solutions like cloning or memory erasure instead of encouraging genuine growth or accountability. Rick enables dysfunction rather than addressing it. Tommy's fate in Fruppyland serves as a warning about what happens when children are isolated from consequences and given unlimited power over others. Tommy survived by becoming a monster who commits incest and cannibalism with his own offspring. Beth was isolated in Fruppyland to prevent her from becoming a similar monster in the real world, but the isolation itself enabled her worst tendencies. She never had to face real consequences for trapping Tommy because Rick helped her cover it up by cloning him. She never developed empathy or accountability because Rick kept erasing or fixing her mistakes. The episode positions Fruppyland as both prison and enabler. It kept Beth from potentially hurting other children, but it also gave her a consequence-free environment where she could act out violent fantasies without real-world repercussions. Tommy became a cannibal god because surviving in Fruppyland required it. Beth became someone who casually commits mass murder because Fruppyland taught her that violence solves problems, and Rick will always clean up the aftermath. Beth's childhood requests and actions suggest she may have been developing into a serial killer before Rick intervened with Fruppyland. The specific tools she wanted, the methodical planning they represent, the lack of empathy required to request poison and weapons, and her jealousy of other children's family relationships all align with warning signs of developing antisocial personality disorder. Rick's solution of isolation and enablement rather than treatment means adult Beth never addressed whatever psychological issues drove her childhood behavior, leaving her capable of explosive violence when triggered. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Beth possibly being a clone who chose to leave her family behind. Rick Sanchez cloned his daughter Beth and erased his own memory of which version is real, leaving the entire Smith family unsure whether they're living with the original Beth or a duplicate designed to replace her. The episode reveals that one Beth chose to abandon her family to have space adventures, while Rick created an identical clone to take her place at home. By the end, Rick deliberately destroys the only record of which Beth is which, making it impossible for anyone, including himself, to ever know the truth about their mother's identity. The episode opens with Space Beth leading a rebellion against the new Galactic Federation. She fights alongside alien resistance forces, risking her life to free enslaved planets across the galaxy. After a dangerous mission, her alien companion suggests she should take a break and asks if she ever misses Earth. Space Beth reveals she doesn't have to miss Earth because she's technically still there. Her father made a perfect clone to take her place so she could leave her family without consequences. Space Beth's companion makes a disturbing suggestion. He offers to remove what he suspects is a proximity-triggered device in her neck, implying it might be a bomb. He speculates this could be how Space Beth discovers Rick never wanted her to return, that he loved the clone more than the original. The companion presents this soul-crushing possibility while offering her addictive medication to cope with the emotional pain. Space Beth realizes she needs to confront Rick about the device in her neck. Meanwhile on Earth, the Beth living with Jerry and the kids seems completely unaware she might be a clone. She suggests the family attend therapy together with Dr. Wong. Rick tries to avoid the session by pretending to disintegrate, but it's just his invisibility belt malfunctioning. When the family prepares to leave for therapy, Rick stays behind, claiming he has other plans. The moment they leave, Space Beth arrives through a portal, armed and angry. Space Beth confronts Rick about the device in her neck. Every engineer who examined it identified it as a bomb designed to kill her if she returned to Earth. Rick dismisses these engineers as primitive, comparing them to cavemen, calling a microwave a rock cabinet. He argues the device isn't a bomb, but something more advanced that these inferior minds can't comprehend. Space Beth doesn't believe him and threatens to kill Rick unless he can explain why she shouldn't. Rick tries to scan Space Beth using technology that would transfer her memories to his device before vaporizing her, confirming the neck device is indeed lethal. His plan fails when the Earth Beth returns from the car, forcing Rick to hide Space Beth and pretend everything is normal. Rick takes Space Beth's place using a disguise, apologizing to Earth Beth for being a piece of trash father while she leaves for therapy. The self-loathing routine works to deflect suspicion temporarily. Once Earth Beth leaves again, Rick and Space Beth talk honestly. Rick admits the device in her neck would have transferred her memory database before killing her, confirming Space Beth's worst fears. Space Beth is confused about why the Earth version of herself went back to Jerry after their divorce. She assumed the clone would make better choices than the original, but the Earth Beth remarried Jerry despite being supposedly free to choose differently. Rick explains the clone is an exact copy, so if she ran back to Jerry, that reflects on Space Beth's own psychology. Space Beth and Rick go drinking together while discussing her space adventures. She describes leading slave rebellions and overthrowing oppressive governments. Rick compliments her for having adventures, but notes they're very similar to Star Wars plots. He suggests she should remember to have more fun and not take the hero role too seriously. Space Beth gets defensive, arguing she's not going to outgrow caring about important causes like Rick did. Rick dismisses this as a temporary hero phase he also went through in his youth. Their conversation is interrupted by news reports. The new Galactic Federation announces they will destroy Earth unless a woman with a very boring name surrenders herself. They're looking for Beth Smith, the most wanted criminal in the galaxy for her rebellion activities. Rick realizes Space Beth's actions have put Earth and the clone Beth in danger. The Federation will track down whichever Beth they find first and destroy the planet to force Space Beth's surrender. Meanwhile, Morty and Summer fight over Rick's invisibility belt. Their sibling conflict escalates until Morty uses thermal goggles to track invisible Summer, and Summer breaks Morty's old belt in retaliation. They eventually agree to trade the invisibility belt and goggles in 1 hour. Summer goes invisible to watch cheerleader practice, while Morty uses the thermal goggles for unclear purposes. Their separate adventures get interrupted when Galactic Federation troops arrive looking for Beth. Federation agents capture Morty, asking if he has psychic powers. Morty lies and claims he can stop their hearts with his mind, causing the agents to surrender immediately out of fear. This doesn't help, because more Federation troops arrive and overwhelm him. The agents explain they're only looking for his mother and just need to know if Morty can kill them with psychic abilities. When Morty confirms he supposedly can, they give up without a fight, showing the Federation's incompetence. The Federation attacks Dr. Wong's therapy office where Jerry and Beth are having a session. Jerry's ridiculous therapy puppet becomes a running joke as Dr. Wong specifically asked him to stop bringing puppets to sessions. The attack is led by Tammy, the former undercover Federation agent who married and betrayed Bird Person in a previous episode. Tammy tells Beth she looks better with her current hairstyle and makes cryptic comments about her stomach. Beth initially doesn't understand what's happening until she sees Space Beth with Rick. The realization hits her that she's a clone, or at least one of them is a clone. Beth has an existential crisis, saying the words out loud for the first time. Tammy doesn't care which Beth is real, and orders both captured for questioning about the Defiance resistance movement. Beth tries to claim she doesn't have a Defiance, then immediately realizes if Space Beth leads the rebellion, she would have those memories if she's the real Beth. Rick attempts to bargain with Tammy, offering himself as a more valuable prisoner than either Beth. He argues he's the smartest man in the universe with the secret to interdimensional travel, surely worth more to the Federation than one rebel leader. Tammy rejects this offer, explaining the new Federation leadership consists of young bug aliens who understand Rick is a non-threat as long as he's left alone. His previous dangerous status came from being actively opposed, so the new strategy is to ignore him completely. Jerry tries to help by saying his customary hey, but can't do anything more useful. Tammy mocks the family's dysfunction and orders both Beths captured. The Federation plans to destroy Earth regardless, having already prepared their planet-destroying weapon called the NX-5. Tammy suggests Rick should find a new universe where everything went better for him. Rick argues she can't tell him what to do, giving Tammy legal justification to shoot him for resisting arrest. Summer and Morty save the family using their invisibility and thermal goggles. The siblings proudly announce they work together, describing this cooperation as their character arc for the episode. They went from fighting over the invisibility belt to collaborating as a team. Rick is grateful but also needs to settle his score with Tammy for making him attend her wedding and for killing his best friend Bird Person. He admits he should have mentioned the dead friend first, since that's more important than wedding attendance. Rick takes the kids to storm the Federation ship and stop Earth's destruction. He makes a deliberate Star Wars reference, annoyed that he has to participate in what he considers a derivative space opera plot. Federation guards try to stop them from landing, but Rick's ship simply crushes anyone in the way. Rick tells Summer to unlock doors by scanning Tammy's dead face, having killed her during the earlier fight. Summer struggles because Tammy's eyes are closed, so Rick and Morty have to manually open her eyelids for the retinal scan. Rick splits the group to handle two objectives. He will rescue both Beths without revealing which is the clone. Morty and Summer will find the NX-5 planet destroyer and shut it down before it fires on Earth. Rick adds that they shouldn't die trying since infinite Earths exist across dimensions, so saving this particular one is just a bonus. This casual dismissal of their home planet's importance annoys Morty and Summer, but they accept the mission anyway. The two Beths are imprisoned together and immediately start competing. Space Beth suggests this is Earth Beth's last chance to guess who was the clone. Earth Beth argues she can tell by looking in Space Beth's eyes, seeing the shameless family abandonment that marks her as Rick's true daughter. Space Beth counters that she was designed by Rick to live with herself, implying Earth Beth is the clone. Earth Beth argues Space Beth made a conscious choice to swallow her dreams with cheap wine and dinosaur-shaped pasta. Their argument reveals deep insecurities both share. Space Beth accuses Earth Beth of fetching their father's lemonade like a servant. Earth Beth claims Space Beth just cosplays as their father during his younger years, seeking his approval through imitation rather than developing her own identity. Both recognize they're essentially the same person with the same psychological damage from Rick's parenting, just manifesting it through different life choices. The only question is which manifestation is the original and which is the designed copy. Rick finds the Beths and makes an announcement over the prison speakers. He declares that whichever Beth is still alive must be his real daughter, but if both survived, they shouldn't hurt each other because the clone isn't worth fighting over. This message manages to insult both Beths simultaneously, while also failing to provide any useful information. Both Beths unite in their anger at Rick, calling him a piece of trash in unison. they realize their father is manipulating them and decide to work together instead. The Beths escape their cell and fight Federation guards together. Space Beth compliments Earth Beth on her combat skills, joking that she kills good for a horse doctor. Earth Beth thanks herself and suggests they could do a Parent Trap scenario together sometime, swapping lives occasionally. Space Beth agrees, but specifies they should only recreate the Lindsay Lohan version of Parent Trap, not the original. Both Beths briefly speak in British accents, referencing the movie while bonding over shared cultural knowledge. Morty and Summer reach the NX-5 control room and overhear guards discussing the Planet Destroyer's weird feature. The weapon destroys entire planets except for Wrangler genes, which cannot be penetrated by the destructive beam. This is a built-in advertising feature, leaving mountains of indestructible denim behind on destroyed worlds as proof that Wrangler genes are tougher than planet-destroying lasers. The guards debate whether this is about conserving denim or just marketing, concluding it's definitely marketing even though it seems stupid. Summer and Morty attack the guards, but realize they can't shut down the NX-5 because the controls are protected by Wrangler genes that the weapon cannot destroy. Morty has a plan. He strips down to his underwear and covers the weapon's targeting sensors with his genes. The NX-5's programming detects corporate sponsor Wrangler genes and refuses to fire, declaring them built too tough to penetrate. This absurd solution works because the weapon's advertising gimmick created an exploitable weakness. Rick confronts his resurrected friend, Bird Person, now called Phoenix Person, after the Federation rebuilt him as a cyborg. Phoenix Person works for the Federation and asks where Tammy is. Rick admits he killed her, not realizing Phoenix Person actually loved Tammy, despite her betrayal. Phoenix Person attacks Rick, and they fight brutally. Rick makes a comment about always wondering who would win if they fought. Phoenix Person responds that wondering this means Rick was always a bad friend, since real friends don't fantasize about fighting each other. The fight goes badly for Rick, until Jerry intervenes using his therapy puppet to impersonate Tammy's voice. Phoenix Person stops attacking when he hears what he thinks is Tammy speaking. Jerry uses the puppet to convince Phoenix Person that Tammy is alive and wants to reunite with him. The puppet flirts with Phoenix Person, offering sweet ass in Tammy's voice. When Phoenix Person gets close enough, Jerry reveals the deception, and someone shuts Phoenix Person down. Jerry's ridiculous puppet saves the day, giving him the only legitimate character arc in the episode. With Earth saved and the family reunited, Rick reveals he has a vial containing the memory of which Beth is real and which is the clone. He erased this memory from his own mind at some point, storing it externally so no one would know the truth. Both Beths immediately reject this revelation. They don't care what's in the vial because Rick is a piece of trash either way. Regardless of which daughter is real, they refuse to let their identities depend on Rick's validation or his secret knowledge. Morty and Summer also don't care which Beth is their real mother. They point out they now have two badass moms, which is a clear upgrade from their previous situation. Summer tells Rick not to drag them into his problems just because he's losing control over the family. The kids have bonded with both versions of their mother and see no reason to privilege one over the other based on arbitrary originality. This rejection of Rick's authority represents growth for the entire family. Earth Beth makes a final demand. She wants Rick to decide for once in her life, not which Beth is real, but whether he wants her to stay and be part of his life or leave. She's forcing Rick to make a parental choice and take responsibility for what he wants from their relationship. Rick looks genuinely conflicted, unable to give a clear answer. The episode shows Rick alone in his garage, looking at the memory vial. Rick projects two images on his wall, trying to decide which Beth should stay. He shuffles the projections like a shell game, mixing up which image represents which Beth until even he can't tell them apart. Rick turns off the projector and admits out loud that he's a terrible father. He keeps the memory vial without watching it, choosing not to know the truth. This decision means no one will ever know which Beth is real, making the question permanently unanswerable. The final scenes show both Beths continuing their lives. One stays with the family on Earth, while the other returns to space adventures. The show deliberately keeps their situations ambiguous, never confirming which Beth made which choice. Both Beths seem content with the arrangement, having bonded as sisters or alternate versions of themselves. The family accepts having two mothers who occasionally swap places and share responsibilities. Rick's choice to destroy his own knowledge represents both growth and continued dysfunction. He's admitting he was a terrible father by creating this situation in the first place. Cloning his daughter so she could simultaneously stay home and have adventures shows Rick values his own convenience over Beth's actual well-being. He wanted both versions of Beth to exist, so he wouldn't have to deal with the consequences of either choice she made. This way, Rick gets a daughter who stays close and a daughter who has exciting adventures without having to respect that real people can't live contradictory lives. The ambiguity also protects Rick from accountability. If the family never knows which Beth is real, they can't blame Rick for the specific choice he made or didn't make. Everyone has to treat both Beths as equally valid, which means Rick doesn't face consequences for potentially replacing his real daughter with a clone, or for letting his real daughter abandon her children. The uncertainty becomes a shield against judgment, letting Rick avoid the responsibility he claimed to accept. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Next up, we have the central finite curve. Rick Sanchez didn't just visit infinite realities. He built a prison around infinity itself, separating all universes where he's the smartest person alive from every other possible reality. This structure, called the central finite curve, represents the most narcissistic act imaginable, with every Rick across infinite dimensions collaborating to wall themselves off inside a bubble where their intelligence reigns supreme. The curve isn't just technology or architecture. It's a monument to ego so massive it required restructuring the multiverse itself, and it condemns infinite versions of Morty to suffer under infinite versions of Rick forever. Evil Morty reveals the truth about the central finite curve when he traps Rick and Morty in the Citadel's dimensional drive chamber. He describes how Rick's built a wall around infinity, creating a barrier that separates all infinite universes where Rick is the smartest man in existence from all the infinite universes where he isn't. This means somewhere in the infinite multiverse, realities exist where Rick is average, stupid, or never became a scientist at all. Universes where Beth had better parents, where Morty grew up confident and capable, where the Smith family lived normal, happy lives without Rick's influence destroying everything. But those realities are locked away outside the curve. Every Rick, Morty, Beth, Summer, and Jerry we've ever seen exists inside this manufactured prison. Every adventure, every universe jump, every alternate timeline has been confined to the specific subset of realities where Rick's genius dominates. The curve ensures that no matter which universe Rick visits, he will always be the smartest person there, always be special, always be needed. It's cosmic narcissism on a scale that defies comprehension. Evil Morty shows Morty a holographic representation of the curve. It appears as a large spiral made of yellow energy balls, each ball representing a universe. Inside each universe, that reality's Rick torments his Morty in various ways. The hologram displays Rick being a piece of shit across infinite variations. One Rick wields a knife with psychopathic intent. Another Rick massacres people while riding Crowhorse, the cybernetic animal from his recent adventure. A Rick surrounded by flames destroys everything around him. Another Rick lies passed out drunk on a bed, too wasted to function. These aren't exceptions. This is the standard. The central finite curve doesn't just contain universes where Rick is smart. It specifically isolates realities where Rick's intelligence makes him the most important person alive, which means it selects for universes where Rick is fundamentally broken. His genius comes paired with alcoholism, depression, narcissism, cruelty, and emotional damage. The curve filters reality itself to ensure these traits remain dominant, because apparently across infinite possibilities, the versions of Rick who are smartest are also the most fucked up. This explains why every Rick we meet shares similar personality disorders despite coming from different realities. They're not naturally this way. The curve selected them specifically because they combine maximum intelligence with maximum dysfunction. Healthy, well-adjusted Ricks exist somewhere in the greater multiverse, but they're locked outside the curve because their intelligence doesn't define them as completely. The curve only contains Ricks for whom being the smartest person alive is their entire identity. Evil Morty describes this structure as an infinite crib built around an infinite baby. Every version of every character has spent every version of their lives trapped in this one massive nursery, constructed entirely to coddle Rick's ego. No matter what happens, Rick remains the smartest. No matter which universe he flees to, his intelligence stays supreme. The curve eliminates any possibility of Rick encountering someone significantly smarter, anyone who could challenge his worldview, anyone who could make him feel average or inadequate. The episode reveals how the curve came to exist through Rick C-137's backstory. After another Rick killed his wife Diane and daughter Beth, C-137 spent decades hunting for his family's murderer. He traveled the multiverse, killing every Rick he encountered, trying to find the one responsible. His vendetta became so destructive that other Ricks banded together to form the Council of Ricks and the Citadel to stop him. Eventually, C-137 and the Citadel formed a truce where C-137 helped build the Citadel's infrastructure in exchange for the Council stopping their pursuit of him. This means C-137, Rick, the main Rick we follow throughout the series, helped construct the very system that enslaves infinite Morties. The Citadel couldn't function without the central finite curve because the curve provides the Citadel's fundamental operating principle. By limiting reality to universes where Rick is always smartest, the curve guarantees that Ricks remain in power across infinite dimensions. It creates the conditions for the Citadel to exist as a government of Ricks ruling over Morties. The curve also enables the Citadel's most horrifying practice, the manufactured Morty industry. Evil Morty explains that rogue Ricks discovered that Morty's brainwaves can hide Rick from Citadel detection. This worked so well that the Citadel created its own Morty market to supply Ricks with grandsons who could mask their presence. Rather than searching infinity for naturally occurring Morties, the Citadel manufactures them using cloning technology and memory implantation. The process is industrial and brutal. Ricks identify Beths and Jerrys across dimensions, manipulating them into relationships. Some manipulations are subtle, like a Rick discreetly pointing out Jerry to Beth in a library. Others are violent, with Ricks shooting teenage Beth and Jerry with love serum darts, causing them to fall and bond instantly when they're too young to consent to being drugged. These forced relationships produce Morties the Citadel can harvest. The Citadel also runs cloning factories that produce Morties directly. Naked Morties are kept in cages, then sent down slides, where they're dressed in clothing and fitted with helmets. Ricks activate these helmets to brainwash the cloned Morties with implanted memories from other Morties, creating instant replacements for dead or missing grandsons. These manufactured Morties are then sent through portals to join their assigned Ricks, believing they grew up naturally with their families. This system only works because of the central finite curve. The curve limits reality to universes where Beth and Jerry reliably produce Morty, where family dynamics follow predictable patterns, where Rick's presence in their lives feels inevitable. Outside the curve, infinite variations might exist where Beth never meets Jerry, where they have different children, where Morty never exists at all. But inside the curve, the family structure remains consistent enough for the Citadel to exploit across infinite dimensions. Evil Morty reveals that Ricks have spent generations manipulating Beth and Jerry's relationship across countless universes to maintain this supply. The episode shows multiple Ricks interfering in their romance, ensuring these two specific people meet and reproduce to create Morties. This means the entire Smith family dynamic, the relationship that defines their lives, is artificially sustained across infinite realities, specifically to manufacture Rick's grandson shields. The central finite curve makes this systematic abuse possible. By isolating universes where Rick's intelligence dominates, the curve creates a power imbalance so extreme that Ricks can engineer entire family bloodlines without consequence. No one inside the curve can stop them because Rick is always the smartest, always the most technologically advanced, always in control. The curve is the prison that makes every other atrocity possible. Evil Morty shows Morty what this really means by displaying scenes from across the curve. Rick sits at his workbench with a pained expression, suffering despite his genius. Another Rick wears a crown reading "King of Shit," acknowledging his own worthlessness even as he maintains his superiority. An injured Morty holds an injured Rick, both broken by their adventures. A Rick sits sadly in a chair next to memory storage technology, so traumatized he's erasing his own past. These images represent the infinite repetition of suffering the curve guarantees. Every version of their lives plays out inside this structure. Every adventure Rick and Morty have taken, every universe they've visited, Every dimension they've fled to has been confined within the central finite curve's boundaries. They think they're exploring infinite possibility, but they're actually trapped in a carefully curated subset of reality designed to flatter Rick's ego. The freedom Rick claims to value is completely illusory. Evil Morty recognizes this truth and refuses to accept it. He doesn't want to overthrow the Ricks or reform the Citadel or make life better for Mortys. He wants out of the curve entirely, to escape into the genuine infinite multiverse where Rick isn't special, where Morty isn't defined by his relationship to Rick, where infinite possibilities actually mean infinite possibilities. Evil Morty calls himself evil because he's sick of Rick, and he argues that anyone who's ever been sick of Rick has been evil by the curve's standards. This reframes Evil Morty's entire character. He's not evil because he's cruel or power-hungry or wants to hurt people. He's evil because he recognizes the central finite curve is a prison, and he wants to leave. Every Morty who realizes they don't have to worship Rick, who questions why their entire existence revolves around serving someone else's ego, becomes evil by default inside this system. The curve defines goodness as submission to Rick's supremacy, and evil as resistance to it. To escape the curve, Evil Morty needs the dimensional drive technology Rick helped design. He hacks the Citadel's portal network, trapping every Rick and Morty inside by redirecting all portal destinations to the Blender dimension or other deadly universes. Anyone who tries to escape dies horribly. This creates panic across the Citadel as the population realizes they're locked inside a collapsing structure with no way out. Evil Morty redirects all of the Citadel's Operation Phoenix vats to power his escape. These vats normally revive dead Ricks and Mortys by growing new bodies and implanting backed up memories. Evil Morty reprograms them so that when Ricks and Mortys die and their consciousness attempts to phoenix into a new body, the vat instead blends their new body into fluid that powers the dimensional drive. Ricks and Mortys across the Citadel start killing themselves and each other, expecting to respawn safely, only to wake up in blender vats that immediately liquefy them. Their blood becomes fuel for Evil Morty's machine. The dimensional drive fires a beam that tears open a rift in the central finite curve, creating a hole in the barrier separating their reality from the true infinite multiverse beyond. Evil Morty watches thousands of Ricks and Mortys die, screaming as they're ground into paste to power his escape route. He shows no remorse because from his perspective, they're already dead. Everyone inside the curve is just a corpse that hasn't stopped moving yet. The beam creates a hole in the barrier, and Evil Morty flies through in a small spacecraft. He breaks through to the other side, floating in the space between universes, and watches as the representation of the central finite curve bursts like fireworks. He pulls out a golden portal gun, creates a golden portal, and steps through to an entirely new multiverse where Rick Sanchez isn't the center of everything. Meanwhile, Rick and Morty barely survive the Citadel's destruction. They evacuate on the Mortyburg section, a circular neighborhood that detaches from the main Citadel and has its own thrusters. The boosters require 2 people to activate together, forcing Rick and Morty to literally hold hands to escape. Their portal gun is completely empty of fluid, meaning they can't jump to another universe. They watch helplessly as the Citadel explodes behind them. The episode reveals that Rick C-137's entire character is built on a lie. He claims to value freedom and independence and infinite possibility, but he helped build a prison around infinity specifically to ensure he'd always be special. He lectures Morty about not looking back and moving forward, but he structured the multiverse to guarantee his past trauma would define every possible future. Rick talks about how nothing matters and everything is meaningless, but he collaborated with other Ricks to make sure his intelligence would always matter most. The central finite curve also recontextualizes every previous episode. When Rick and Morty switched realities after destroying their original world, they didn't escape to true freedom. They just moved to another cell in the same prison. When Rick claimed infinite universes meant infinite chances to start over, he was lying. All those universes exist inside the curve, meaning they're all fundamentally the same. Every Morty Rick has encountered was trapped in this structure, bred specifically to serve Ricks like him. Even Rick's relationship with Morty is tainted by this revelation. When Rick returned to Beth's life and started taking Morty on adventures, it wasn't spontaneous bonding or genuine affection. Rick knew that system existed. New Morties were manufactured to be Rick's companions, knew the entire structure was designed to make Morty dependent on him. Every moment of their relationship has been built on foundations of systematic exploitation that Rick helped create. The central finite curve represents the ultimate expression of Rick's character flaw. His intelligence makes him capable of anything, including restructuring reality itself, but he uses that power exclusively to protect his ego. Rather than accepting that infinite realities might contain beings smarter than him, rather than growing or changing or accepting limitations, Rick conspired with infinite versions of himself to wall off the parts of infinity that challenged his narcissism, and every Morty suffers for it. They're born into a prison they can't see, bred to worship someone who sees them as tools, manipulated into believing their relationship with Rick is special, when it's actually industrial manufacturing at infinite scale. The central finite curve doesn't just trap them physically, it traps them psychologically, making them believe the prison is freedom, making them believe their suffering has meaning, making them forgive Rick for atrocities, because forgiveness is literally bred into them. Evil Morty escapes, but our Morty stays. The episode ends with Rick and Morty floating in space on a fragment of the destroyed Citadel, portal gun empty, watching the structure burn. They're still inside the curve, even though the Citadel is gone. The prison remains standing even as its capital city falls. And Morty, despite knowing everything now, despite seeing proof of the systematic abuse, chooses to stay with Rick anyway, because the curve has spent his entire life conditioning him to make exactly that choice. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Next up, the fact that Rick's catchphrase isn't humor at all, but a disguised plea for help. Rick's catchphrase is actually a cry for help. Rick Sanchez's signature catchphrase, Wubba Lubba Dub Dub, isn't meaningless nonsense. It's a desperate cry for help that he disguises as a joke, shouting his pain at everyone around him while pretending not to care. The phrase translates to, "I am in great pain, please help me," in bird person's language, meaning every time Rick says it while partying or celebrating, he's actually screaming that he's suffering. This revelation transforms every previous utterance of the phrase, from silly comic relief into a deeply disturbing pattern of someone begging for help while ensuring nobody takes him seriously. The truth comes out during the cleanup after Rick's massive house party. The Smith residence is completely trashed, with debris everywhere, and the family facing severe consequences when Beth and Jerry return home. Morty is frantically trying to clean while Summer sits defeated on the couch. Rick has passed out drunk on the larger couch, snoring after hours of partying and drug use. The house party spiraled so far out of control that it transported the entire building to an alien dimension filled with giant testicle monsters, resulting in at least one death when a shirtless guy got grabbed by an alien creature. Bird Person stays behind to help Morty clean up. As Morty picks up trash and puts it in a garbage bag, Bird Person hands him a piece of trash and asks if he can assist. Morty accepts the help, and they work together for a moment before Bird Person asks a pointed question. He wants to know if Morty understands what Wubba Lubba Dub Dub actually means. Morty dismisses it immediately as just Rick's stupid nonsense catchphrase, not thinking there's any deeper meaning to Rick's behavior. Bird Person corrects him with devastating simplicity. The phrase isn't nonsense at all. In Bird Person's people's tongue, it translates directly to, "I am in great pain, please help me." This isn't an approximate translation or loose interpretation. Those are the literal words Rick is saying every time he shouts his catchphrase. Every party, every adventure, every moment of apparent celebration where Rick yells, "Wubba Lubba Dub Dub," has actually been him explicitly asking for help while making it sound like a joke. Morty refuses to accept this interpretation. He argues that Rick is saying it ironically, that he doesn't really mean it. This is Morty's defense mechanism kicking in, his way of protecting himself from the implications of what Bird Person just revealed. If Rick is genuinely crying out for help every time he says his catchphrase, then Morty has been ignoring those cries repeatedly. Summer overhears this conversation and gets up from the couch, walking away without comment. The information is too uncomfortable for her to process while dealing with her own party disaster. Bird Person doesn't let Morty's denial stand. He walks closer to Morty and states plainly that Rick is indeed in very deep pain, which is why Rick must numb himself constantly. Bird Person isn't speculating or reading into Rick's behavior. He's stating facts based on knowing Rick for years and understanding his language. The partying, the drinking, the drug use that Morty just witnessed all night, the reckless adventures. Everything Rick does serves the purpose of numbing pain so severe he can't function without substances or distractions. Morty tries to dismiss Birdperson's analysis by calling him by the wrong name, showing his discomfort with this conversation. Birdperson corrects him, stating his name clearly. Morty then tries a different approach, arguing that Rick isn't complicated at all. According to Morty, Rick is just a huge asshole. This reductive view lets Morty avoid confronting the reality that his grandfather is a deeply traumatized person, suffering constantly beneath his cruel exterior. Birdperson challenges this dismissal with a simple question. If Rick is just a huge asshole and nothing more, why does Morty care so much about being allowed to continue their adventures together? The question cuts to the heart of Morty's contradictory feelings. He claims Rick is terrible, yet he's been desperately trying all night to fix problems and clean up messes specifically to ensure Beth doesn't ban him from going on adventures with Rick. Morty's actions reveal he cares deeply about maintaining his relationship with Rick, despite all the abuse and chaos. Birdperson points out that fate has presented Morty with an opportunity to free himself from Rick forever. Beth threatened to end the adventures if anything went wrong, and everything went catastrophically wrong. The house was transported to another dimension. Multiple people and aliens got injured or killed. The property is destroyed. Morty has every justification to walk away and let Rick face consequences alone. Yet Birdperson knows Morty won't take this escape route, because Morty's attachment to Rick runs deeper than he wants to admit. Morty walks into the kitchen and throws his garbage bag on the floor, declaring he's sick of having adventures with Rick. He's trying to convince himself he doesn't care, that he'd be better off without Rick in his life. But his words sound hollow even as he says them. Birdperson recognizes this performance and responds with another saying from his people. Gubba nub nub do ra ka translates to, whatever lets you sleep at night, a phrase calling out self-deception and comfortable lies people tell themselves. Summer's phone notification interrupts the moment. She checks it and announces that their parents are right around the corner, almost home. The crisis is immediate. Beth and Jerry will see the destroyed house and traumatized children within minutes. Birdperson recognizes this as Morty's moment of choice. He tells Morty to choose wisely before calling for Tammy, who jumps on his back so he can fly away. Birdperson has given Morty all the information and perspective needed to make an informed decision, but the actual choice belongs to Morty alone. Morty looks out the window and sees Beth and Jerry's car driving around the corner toward the house. He looks back at Rick, still passed out on the couch, completely vulnerable and unaware of the approaching disaster. Summer states the obvious, that they're screwed. This is the moment where Morty could walk away, let Rick face consequences, free himself from someone who causes him constant pain. Instead, Morty walks over to Rick and shakes him awake. Rick wakes up confused and disoriented, asking what's happening. Morty urgently tells him their parents are home and Rick needs to do something quick. Rick slowly processes this information, sitting up and grabbing a glass of water from the coffee table. He drinks it while Morty watches their parents walk up the driveway, panic rising. Rick asks Morty to bring him the thing, describing it vaguely as having buttons and lights and making beeping sounds. Morty points out this describes everything in Rick's garage. Summer brings Rick a remote device, solving the problem Morty couldn't. Rick thanks her and presses a button, causing orange rays of light to flash. When Morty asks what Rick did, Rick tells him to see for himself. Morty and Summer walk outside to discover Rick has frozen time completely. Beth and Jerry are stuck mid-stride on the driveway. Nothing moves. Rick casually mentions everything is frozen and mocks Slow Mobius, an alien with time powers who was at the party earlier. Morty asks how long time will stay frozen. Rick doesn't know, but offers them whatever they want. A week, a month, however long they need. Summer suggests they start cleaning and see how they feel, approaching the problem practically. This begins an extended montage of Rick, Morty, and Summer spending time together in frozen time, initially cleaning, but eventually just having fun together as a family. The montage shows them cleaning the living room, with Morty vacuuming, Summer wiping tables, and Rick sweeping. They repair and repaint the damaged wall, playfully flicking paint at each other. They carve pumpkins and place them on the frozen Beth and Jerry's heads as a joke. They run through busy streets, pulling down frozen people's pants. They steal a new TV from Best Buy to replace the one that got destroyed. They watch the Titanic movie together outside, mocking it as a waste of time and making jokes about frozen time. Summer reflects that this experience has been so much fun. Morty notices that throughout this entire period, Rick hasn't said Wubba Lubba Dub Dub even once. Rick confirms he doesn't need to anymore because he has a new catchphrase. When Morty asks what it is, Rick says, "I love my grandkids." Morty and Summer both say, "Aw," and hug Rick in a genuine moment of family connection and affection. Rick immediately undercuts this tender moment by yelling, "Psych! Just kidding." His actual new catchphrase is, "I don't give a fuck." He turns on music and starts dancing while singing along, and Morty and Summer join him despite the emotional whiplash. Rick shouts about rolling credits and ending season 1, celebrating the conclusion while his grandchildren dance with him. The episode ends with them partying together in frozen time, having chosen family connection over consequences or freedom. This ending recontextualizes Bird Person's revelation about the catchphrase. Rick was crying for help all night by saying Wubba Lubba Dub Dub during the party. Nobody heard him because he made it sound like celebration. But during his time alone with Morty and Summer, when they bonded as family and had genuine fun together, Rick didn't say the phrase at all. He didn't need to cry for help, because for those moments, he actually wasn't in as much pain. The companionship and acceptance from his grandchildren temporarily alleviated the suffering he usually numbs with substances and chaos. But Rick can't maintain vulnerability or admit he needs his family. When Morty notices Rick hasn't said his catchphrase, and Rick almost admits he loves them, he has to immediately mock that honesty and replace it with aggressive nihilism. "I don't give a fuck" becomes his new shield, a way to reassert his persona of not caring about anything after briefly letting his guard down. The joke about loving his grandkids reveals the truth. He does love them, desperately. But admitting that genuine need feels more dangerous than crying for help in a language most people don't understand. Bird Person's explanation reveals the tragedy of Rick's entire character. He broadcasts his pain constantly, but ensures nobody takes it seriously. He surrounds himself with people while making sure they can't truly help him. He creates catchphrases that literally mean "I'm suffering, please help me," while performing them as comedy. Rick has engineered his own isolation by making his cries for help indistinguishable from his persona, ensuring he'll never have to face the vulnerability of actually being helped. Morty chooses to stay with Rick despite learning this truth. He wakes Rick up instead of letting him face consequences. He helps clean and spends time bonding during frozen time. He accepts Rick's emotional retreat after the brief moment of honesty. This pattern will repeat throughout their relationship. Rick crying for help in ways nobody can answer. Morty recognizing the pain but staying anyway. Both of them trapped in a dynamic where love and suffering are completely intertwined. The phrase Wubba Lubba Dub Dub appears throughout the series before and after this reveal, and now every instance carries the weight of Bird Person's translation. Every time Rick shouts it while celebrating a victory, or starting an adventure, or doing something reckless, he's screaming that he's in pain and needs help. The comedy catchphrase is actually a continuous suicide note written in a language he knows most people won't understand, allowing him to cry out while maintaining plausible deniability that he ever asked for anything at all. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Rick Prime and the murder of Diane and young Beth. Rick Prime murdered Diane and young Beth. Rick Sanchez's wife Diane and daughter Beth were murdered by another version of Rick, an act so traumatic it defined everything that came after. This wasn't a random tragedy or accident. Rick's own alternate self deliberately targeted his family, killing them with a bomb while Rick watched helplessly. The episode reveals this truth through Bird Person's memories, showing that Rick C-137 spent decades hunting the killer across infinite realities, becoming the violent nihilist we know because his family was stolen by someone who wore his face. The revelation occurs when Rick enters Bird Person's mind to rescue his dying friend. Bird Person is in a coma after being resurrected as a cyborg by the Galactic Federation, and his consciousness has retreated deep into suppressed memories, essentially attempting suicide by shutting down his own brain. Rick converts himself into thought and injects himself into Bird Person's mind, navigating through layers of memories to find his friend before complete neural pathway erosion kills them both. Inside Bird Person's mind, Rick encounters a younger memory version of himself from when they first met. This memory Rick represents who Rick was before everything went wrong, still idealistic and willing to fight for causes he believed in. The contrast between Memory Rick and current Rick is stark. Memory Rick questions why the older version is so callous and cynical, unable to understand how he becomes this person. Current Rick responds that Memory Rick will eventually become him, that this transformation is inevitable. The memories reveal Rick's history with Bird Person, showing them as freedom fighters against the Galactic Federation. They fought together at the Battle of Blood Ridge, a massive conflict that Bird Person remembers as their defining moment of friendship. The battle was victorious, with Rick and Bird Person fighting side by side against overwhelming Federation forces. After the battle, Rick revealed to Bird Person his secret about the multiverse. Rick explained that he could take Bird Person to this same battlefield in a universe where they lost, or another where they won, or another where the war never happened. All equally real, all equally unreal. Rick stated that none of it matters, that infinite realities mean nothing has genuine significance. When Bird Person asked why Rick helped fight if nothing matters, Rick answered that he respects Bird Person and wanted Bird Person to know he could respect Rick back. Bird Person rejected this philosophy. He told Rick that even though nothing matters according to Rick's multiverse logic, their relationship matters to Rick. Rick tried to argue he never used the word relationship, but Bird Person continued, saying the relationship they have isn't worth his integrity. Rick offered Bird Person a chance to join him doing awesome things that matter, but Bird Person refused, calling himself a judgmental dork and saying he'd rather maintain his values than compromise them for adventures. This moment marked the beginning of Rick's isolation. His best friend rejected him not because of who Rick was, but because of Rick's philosophy that nothing matters. Bird Person saw Rick's nihilism as incompatible with meaningful friendship. Rick gave Bird Person a beacon to call if he ever needed help, sarcastically saying he hoped he wouldn't wear it out. The friendship continued, but with clear boundaries, Bird Person maintaining distance from Rick's worldview. The memories don't directly show Diane and Beth's murder during the episode's main narrative. However, the episode confirms Rick's traumatic past through context and Rick's behavior. When Memory Rick confronts Current Rick about living with a version of their dead daughter, Current Rick doesn't deny it. Memory Rick calls Current Rick a creep for moving in with abandoned adult Beths, horrified by what he becomes. Current Rick argues it's complicated, but Memory Rick insists that living with a version of their dead daughter had better be complicated. This exchange confirms several devastating facts. Diane and Beth died. Rick responded by eventually moving in with an alternate universe's Beth after she grew up and had her own family. Rick justified this by claiming the situation is more complicated than it appears, but he can't actually defend it. Memory Rick's horror at discovering this future represents Rick's own self-awareness that his choices are morally questionable, driven by trauma rather than healthy coping. The episode also reveals Rick's response to the murder. He became a hunter, traveling across infinite realities trying to find the Rick who killed his family. This vendetta consumed him, transforming him from an idealistic scientist into a violent killer. The memories show Rick meeting Bird Person at a music festival while high on Synthol Deempathate, forming their friendship during this period of Rick's life when he was actively searching for his family's murderer. Rick's relationship with Bird Person developed during his darkest period. He was alone, traumatized, hunting for revenge across infinite universes. Bird Person became his anchor to something resembling friendship and connection. But Rick's philosophy that nothing matters emerged from his trauma. If infinite versions of his wife and daughter exist across infinite realities, but his specific Diane and Beth are dead, what does any individual life mean? Rick's nihilism is a defense mechanism against the unbearable specificity of his loss. The episode shows Rick's garage AI offering to perform oral sex on random visitors, demonstrating the casual depravity Rick has normalized in his life. This isn't played for laughs in context, but rather shows how Rick's environment reflects his psychological state. Everything in Rick's life is transactional and meaningless, from his technology to his relationships. The AI he created mirrors his own approach to existence, offering empty physical gratification as a substitute for genuine connection. When Rick finally rescues Bird Person from his suicidal retreat, he discovers Bird Person has a child he never knew about. Tammy, Bird Person's wife, who betrayed and killed him at their wedding, had a child. The Galactic Federation suppressed Bird Person's memories of this child when they resurrected him as Phoenix Person, their cyborg weapon. Rick learns about the child's existence but initially doesn't tell Bird Person, apparently considering whether to keep this information secret to ensure Bird Person would still have time to hang out. This moment reveals Rick's deepest flaw. He lost his own family and spent decades hunting their killer. Yet when presented with information about his best friend's child, his first instinct is to consider hiding it so Bird Person won't be too busy with parenting. Rick's trauma has warped him so completely that he can't properly value parent-child relationships anymore, even for people he cares about. He eventually tells Bird Person about the child to save both their lives during their escape, but Bird Person recognizes Rick's hesitation. After they escape Bird Person's mind and return to their bodies, Bird Person directly confronts Rick. He asks if there was really a moment where Rick knew about the child but chose not to inform Bird Person on the chance that Bird Person might become too busy with child rearing to hang out. Rick tries to deflect by pointing out the weird way to thank someone for discovering your kid, but Bird Person doesn't let it go. He states clearly that Rick didn't know about the child when he came to rescue Bird Person, and once aware, refrained from sharing until necessary to save himself. Rick's silence confirms Bird Person's accusation. Bird Person simply says he'll see Rick when he sees Rick, acknowledging the disloyalty but not ending the friendship. This measured response shows Bird Person understands Rick's damage while refusing to excuse it. Their friendship continues, but with clear-eyed recognition of Rick's flaws. Bird Person leaves to deal with his parenting responsibilities, the same kind of responsibilities Rick lost when his family was murdered. The episode ends with Rick alone in his garage, having saved his friend but revealed his own moral bankruptcy in the process. A memory version of young Rick managed to escape from Bird Person's mind into current Rick's brain, creating a situation where Rick has a younger, more idealistic version of himself living in his head. This memory, Rick represents who Rick was before the murder, before the violence, before the nihilism. Current Rick offers to bring Memory Rick to life so they can get a beer together, but Memory Rick asks if becoming real means he eventually becomes Current Rick. Current Rick confirms that yes, becoming real means eventually transforming into the damaged person he is now. Memory Rick suggests maybe they should just remember getting a beer instead, preferring to remain a hopeful memory rather than live long enough to become what Rick has become. The implication is clear. Rick's transformation from idealistic scientist to nihilistic alcoholic isn't random character development, but the inevitable result of surviving what he survived. The murder of Diane and Beth explains everything about Rick's character. His alcoholism numbs the pain of loss. His nihilism protects him from caring about anyone enough to be devastated again. His casual cruelty keeps people at distance so he won't form attachments that can be torn away. His obsession with Morty and moving in with Beth's family represents his attempt to reclaim what was stolen, even though he knows these aren't his original family members and can never replace what he lost. Rick's entire life is organized around a trauma he can never fully process. He travels infinite realities, but can't escape the one reality where his family died. He surrounds himself with alternate versions of people he lost, but knows they're not the same. He forms friendships, but sabotages them with his philosophy that nothing matters. He saves lives, but treats rescue as transactional rather than meaningful. Everything Rick does traces back to the moment another Rick murdered the people he loved most. The darkest aspect is that Rick's family was killed by himself. Not metaphorically, but literally another Rick. This means the multiverse Rick claims makes nothing matter also contains infinite versions of the person who destroyed his life. Every Rick he encounters could be the killer. Every Rick he meets reminds him of his own face attached to his family's murderer. The weapon that killed Diane and Beth looked exactly like him, sounded like him, had his intelligence and his capacity for violence. Rick can never escape his trauma because it's embedded in his own identity. He is simultaneously the victim and shares a face with the perpetrator. His nihilistic philosophy about infinite realities being equally real and unreal is his only defense against this unbearable truth. If nothing matters, then his grief doesn't matter. If all realities are equally valid, then the one where his family died has no special significance. Rick's entire worldview is a desperate attempt to make his loss bearable by making everything meaningless. But the episode proves this defense mechanism doesn't work. Rick still cares enough about Bird Person to risk his life entering a collapsing mind. He still hesitates to tell Bird Person about his child because he wants his friend available to hang out. He still moved in with a version of his dead daughter's family. He still feels pain beneath all the alcohol and nihilism and cruelty. The murder of Diane and Beth didn't just kill them. It killed who Rick was and left this damaged shell, pretending not to care while caring desperately about everything. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Rick, using Morty as a human shield. Rick uses Morty as a human shield. Rick Sanchez doesn't just endanger Morty through reckless adventures. He uses his grandson as a living shield against detection, exploiting the specific brainwave patterns Morty generates to hide himself from enemies and governments across infinite dimensions. This isn't metaphorical protection or accidental benefit. Ricks across the multiverse deliberately keep Mortys around because a Morty's naturally anxious brain produces waves that perfectly cancel out Rick's genius-level brain signature, making Rick invisible to anyone scanning for him. Millions of Mortys exist solely to be camouflage for Ricks who need to hide. The truth emerges when Rick C-137 and Morty get kidnapped by the Council of Ricks and brought to the Citadel, a massive structure where Ricks from across dimensions have banded together. Evil Rick, a rogue Rick who's been murdering other Ricks and kidnapping their Mortys, has been tracked to his secret base. When authorities storm this base, they discover something horrifying outside the fortress, a massive dome made entirely of tortured Mortys, arranged in a geometric pattern, all of them screaming and crying. The Morty shield consists of hundreds of Mortys standing in organized rows and columns, forming a protective barrier around Evil Rick's hideout. Each Morty is clearly in distress, some crying, some looking traumatized and defeated. They're not volunteers. They're prisoners forced to stand in specific positions to create the optimal shielding effect. The visual is deliberately disturbing, showing row after row of the same teenage boy suffering to protect someone who sees them as nothing more than equipment. One of the Council Ricks explains the purpose of this shield to the authorities investigating the scene. He states that Ricks across dimensions have a characteristic brain signature that's easy to track. Anyone with the right scanning technology can locate a Rick instantly by detecting this distinctive pattern his genius brain creates. This makes Ricks vulnerable to enemies, governments, or anyone else who wants to find them. The Galactic Federation, for instance, actively hunts Ricks and can track them through this brain signature. However, Morty's brain waves have the opposite signature. Morty's brain produces patterns that are precisely inverted from Rick's genius brain waves. When a Rick and Morty are in close proximity, their brain signatures cancel each other out perfectly, creating a null effect that makes both of them invisible to scanners. This isn't a side effect or happy accident. It's a precise mathematical relationship between their specific brain chemistry that Ricks discovered and immediately weaponized. The Council Rick explains this works so well that it's become standard practice among Ricks. He specifically states that keeping Mortys close has become a necessity for Ricks who want to operate without being detected. The implication is clear. Ricks don't take Mortys on adventures out of affection or family bonding. They bring Mortys along because a Morty functions as active camouflage, a living cloaking device that must be physically present for the protection to work. This reveals the true purpose of Rick showing up in Beth's life after decades of absence. He didn't return because he missed his daughter or wanted to connect with family. He came back because Beth had a 14-year-old son whose brainwaves could hide Rick from his enemies. The timing of Rick's return precisely coincides with Morty reaching the age where his adolescent anxiety would generate the strongest shielding effect. Younger or older, Morty's brain might not produce the optimal frequency. Rick needed a teenage grandson specifically. Our Rick C-137 initially denies needing Morty for camouflage, claiming their relationship is genuine, but the evidence throughout the episode contradicts this. Evil Rick specifically built a shield of Mortys because he understood how effective they are at blocking detection. The Council of Ricks operates a society where Ricks and Mortys pair up in a system that treats Mortys as assigned equipment rather than individuals. The entire Citadel is structured around this Rick-Morty pairing as a fundamental unit. The Citadel itself demonstrates the scale of this exploitation. Thousands of Ricks live there, and each has their own Morty. Some Mortys appear happy, some seem defeated, but all serve the same function, whether they know it or not. They're biological shielding for Ricks, who need to hide from authorities. The Citadel exists as a refuge specifically because having concentrated Mortys in one location creates a massive dead zone where no Rick signatures can be detected from outside. This explains several disturbing aspects of Rick and Morty's relationship. Rick insists Morty accompany him on dangerous adventures even when Morty doesn't want to go. Rick gets angry when Morty tries to stay home or live a normal life. Rick manipulates Beth and Jerry to maintain access to Morty despite the obvious danger Rick causes. All of this makes sense if Rick fundamentally needs Morty present for his own survival and freedom of movement. The Council Rick mentions that this shielding effect has been exploited by rogue Ricks, confirming its common knowledge among Ricks across dimensions. Evil Rick isn't doing anything unprecedented by using Mortys as shields. He just scaled it up and made it visible. Every Rick with a Morty is doing the same thing, just with one Morty instead of hundreds. The mass shield outside Evil Rick's base is simply the logical extension of what all Ricks do individually. This creates a horrifying power dynamic. Morty thinks he's special to Rick, that their adventures matter, that Rick chose him specifically out of love or respect. But Morty is fundamentally replaceable. Any teenage boy with sufficiently anxious brain chemistry could serve the same shielding function. Rick needs a Morty, not this Morty. The relationship isn't built on genuine connection, but on Rick's survival needs and Morty's biological utility. The episode reveals there are infinite Mortys across infinite dimensions. This means Ricks have an endless supply of potential shields. If one Morty dies or becomes unsuitable, infinite replacements exist. The Citadel even appears to have systems for matching Ricks with compatible Mortys, treating them like interchangeable components in a machine. Mortys are mass-produced by the existence of infinite universes, making each individual Morty worthless despite being essential to Rick's survival. Evil Rick's Morty shield demonstrates what happens when Ricks stop pretending the relationship is anything other than utilitarian. Instead of one Morty traveling with him, maintaining the illusion of partnership, Evil Rick assembled hundreds into a literal human shield. He's more honest about the exploitation than other Ricks, who dress it up as family bonding or adventure. The Mortys in his shield aren't there by choice. They're prisoners forced into service, just like our Morty is trapped by family obligation and manipulation. The geometry of the shield matters too. The Mortys are arranged in precise patterns, suggesting Evil Rick calculated the optimal configuration for maximum shielding effect. This isn't random. He engineered the placement of each Morty to create overlapping interference patterns that make his base completely invisible to scanners. The Mortys aren't just standing around. They're positioned with mathematical precision, like antenna arrays. They're suffering optimized for maximum tactical advantage. Some of the Mortys in the shield are crying. Others look resigned and defeated. None of them appear willing participants. This visual tells the truth about what being a Rick's Morty really means. Being used as a tool regardless of your feelings, positioned where Rick needs you, suffering through whatever serves Rick's purposes. The Mortys in Evil Rick's shield are just more honest victims of the same exploitation our Morty experiences every episode. The discovery of the Morty shield also reveals that Ricks have been hunting and capturing Mortys across dimensions for this purpose. Evil Rick didn't create these Mortys, he stole them from their respective Ricks. This means a thriving economy exists around Morty procurement. The Citadel later episodes confirm has black markets where Mortys are bought and sold, where Ricks can acquire replacement Mortys, where the entire society treats Mortys as commodities. The Morty shield is where this dark economy becomes visible. Our Rick C-137 acts, horrified by the Morty shield, but his horror rings hollow. He uses Morty for exactly the same purpose as Evil Rick, just at smaller scale and with more plausible deniability. Every adventure Rick drags Morty on, Rick is safer because Morty is present. Every time Rick insists Morty skip school to help with some scheme, Rick is prioritizing his need for mobile camouflage over Morty's well-being. The relationship is fundamentally built on Rick's survival needs. This also explains why Rick never shows up alone to dangerous situations. He always brings Morty, even when Morty adds no obvious value to the mission. Morty isn't particularly smart, strong, or skilled. He's just a scared teenager who wants to go to school and talk to girls. but Rick drags him into life-threatening scenarios constantly because Rick is more vulnerable without his Morty shield. Morty's presence isn't about backup or assistance. It's about Rick maintaining invisibility to his enemies. The Brainwave cancellation works both ways, meaning Morty also becomes invisible when near Rick. This might seem like a benefit, but it's actually another form of control. Morty can't be tracked or found when he's with Rick, meaning he's essentially disappeared from normal society. Beth and Jerry can't locate him when he's on adventures. School can't account for his absences. Authorities investigating Rick's activities can't detect Morty's involvement. The shielding effect traps Morty in Rick's world by making him invisible to anyone who might rescue him. The episode later reveals evil Rick is actually controlled by evil Morty, adding another layer to the horror. Evil Morty understood he was being used as a shield and decided to turn the tables, using a Rick as his puppet instead. But evil Morty still maintains the Morty shield around his base, suggesting even he recognizes the tactical value of using other Mortys as camouflage. Liberation from one exploitative Rick doesn't mean rejecting the exploitation. Evil Morty just switched which side of it he's on. The Morty shield outside evil Rick's base represents the truth about Rick and Morty's relationship, stripped of sentiment and justification. Every Morty exists to serve Rick's needs. Every Rick views Mortys as tools first, and people maybe never. The adventures, the claimed affection, the moments of apparent bonding. All of it exists within a framework where Morty's fundamental purpose is being Rick's biological cloaking device. The shield makes this purpose literally visible. This revelation recontextualizes every episode. When Rick talks about the importance of Morty coming on adventures, he's not expressing preference or affection. He's stating operational necessity. When Rick manipulates Beth and Jerry to keep access to Morty despite the obvious danger, he's protecting his asset. When Rick shows rare moments of caring about Morty's safety, he's protecting his shield. The relationship is built on Rick needing Morty's brainwaves to stay hidden, with everything else as window dressing. The Citadel's existence proves this system operates at massive scale across infinite dimensions. Thousands of Ricks use thousands of Mortys as camouflage, creating a society built on the systematic exploitation of vulnerable teenagers by their own grandfathers. The Council of Ricks has formalized and bureaucratized this exploitation, creating systems to assign Mortys to Ricks, track Morty populations, and maintain the supply of human shields necessary for Rick society to function. Our Rick might claim he's different, that he genuinely cares about Morty beyond his utility as camouflage. But the show demonstrates repeatedly that Rick will sacrifice anyone and anything for his own survival and freedom. He's destroyed universes, abandoned families, betrayed friends, and committed countless atrocities. The idea that he wouldn't exploit Morty for brainwave camouflage requires believing Rick has moral boundaries the evidence doesn't support. The Morty shield shows what Rick really thinks Mortys are for. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Next up, we have Unity's planet-wide identity suicide after losing Rick. Unity's planet-wide identity suicide after losing Rick. The final scene of autoerotic assimilation shows Rick building a suicide machine in his garage while the song "Do You Feel It" by Chaos plays. He assembles a metal contraption using 2 bulbs, pulls a frozen alien creature from storage, brings it to life with chemicals, then uses the device to disintegrate it with a blast of energy. He positions his own head under the second bulb and activates it. At the last second, he passes out from drinking the chemicals, falling unconscious just as the killing blast fires over his head. The camera pulls back through the garage door, showing Rick slumped over the desk through the night and into morning, while Jerry happily weeds the driveway outside, completely unaware his father-in-law nearly killed himself. What gets less attention is what Unity did on the other side of the universe. The episode doesn't show Unity's suicide attempt directly, but the pattern becomes clear when you understand how hive minds work in this show. Unity is a collective consciousness that controls every person it assimilates. When Unity drinks, everybody gets drunk. When Unity loses control, everybody loses control. When Unity decides to die, everybody dies. The breakup letter Unity leaves scattered across the entire planet reveals the depth of the problem. Unity writes in notes because it's not strong enough to do it in persons. The hive mind that conquered an entire planet, that turned sex offenders into marine biologists and homeless people into philosophers, that maintained coordination across billions of bodies simultaneously, couldn't face Rick directly to end the relationship. Unity had to write it down because speaking the words would have been impossible. Unity's letter explains the fundamental toxicity of the relationship. Unity says it's attracted to Rick for the same reason it can't be with him. Rick can't change. Unity recognizes this pattern but admits it clearly means I have a problem with myself. Unity describes an endless cycle of conquest without completion, unifying species after species and never really being whole. The hive mind that presents itself as perfect integration is actually running from something, trying to fill a void that can't be filled by absorbing more and more beings. The most devastating line in Unity's letter is this: I know how it goes with us. I lose who I am and become part of you. Because, in a strange way, you're better at what I do without even trying. Unity is a hive mind. Unity's entire existence is about absorbing other consciousnesses and making them part of itself. But somehow, Rick is better at consuming Unity than Unity is at consuming anything else. The entity that takes over planets loses itself when it's around Rick. This shows up throughout the episode in ways that seem fun at first, but become increasingly disturbing. When Rick arrives, Unity immediately starts doing things that go against everything it claims to value. Unity phased out recreational substances because there's no need for escape from the self when your world is one. But Rick wants to get high, so Unity manufactures drugs from materials provided by Beta 7, its neighboring hive mind ally. Unity spent time becoming a young hive mind with the population of a small town, grew into a planetary consciousness, worked toward becoming a Type 1 civilization that would join the Galactic Federation. Then Rick shows up, and Unity starts bombing its own cities for fun. Unity evacuates the town first, showing the crowd of displaced people who are fine, but the impulse itself reveals the problem. Unity has perfect control over billions of bodies. Unity could have just made everyone in that town wave at Rick, or dance, or spell out his name in the streets. Instead, Unity chose to blow everything up because that's what Rick would find entertaining. Unity's decision-making immediately starts reflecting Rick's values instead of its own. The stadium scene makes this even clearer. Rick wants the entire field of your largest stadium covered end-to-end with naked redheads, and the stands packed with every man that remotely resembles my father. Unity creates this immediately. Thousands of people's bodies are being used as sexual props and psychological torture devices for Rick's gratification. The redheads seem like they're in a hurry to be somewhere else, according to Morty, meaning Unity is forcing them to run toward the stadium while they're trying to go anywhere else. Unity is making people participate in Rick's extremely specific sexual fantasy against their will. Unity has control of their bodies, but not their minds completely. They can still want to escape even if they can't. Unity starts losing control as the episode progresses. At first, it's subtle. Unity admits to being drunk while piloting a hovercopter and running 200,000 pediatric hospitals and 12 million deep fryers. Unity jokes about it, saying, "If I wanted to be sober, I wouldn't have gotten drunk." But this reveals something terrible about how hive minds work. Unity getting drunk means every body under Unity's control is intoxicated. The doctors performing surgery are drunk. The people cooking food for millions are drunk. The pilots flying vehicles are drunk. Unity is risking mass casualties across an entire planet because Rick wanted to party. Then Unity starts losing assimilation completely. People begin falling down and vomiting in the streets. Vehicles crash. Buildings collapse. Stephen Phillips, the registered sex offender Unity had reformed into a productive citizen, reverts to his original personality and immediately asks to photograph Summer's feet. The marine biologist who used to be a suicidal drug addict goes back to being herself. Ron Benson and Daryl Jefferson, who Unity was keeping cooperative, immediately start screaming at each other about whose nipple race is superior and spark a planet-wide race war. Summer thinks she caused this by encouraging individuality, but she didn't. Unity was already falling apart because of Rick. Unity losing control of billions of bodies simultaneously while also running critical infrastructure should have caused mass death. Hospitals full of patients suddenly staffed by confused people who don't know where they are or what they're doing. Pilots of aircraft suddenly regaining consciousness mid-flight with no memory of how they got there. Parents looking down at children they don't recognize. The episode doesn't show the aftermath, but the implications are horrifying. Unity has to pull itself together enough to save Summer and Morty from the race war, sending in SWAT teams and a hovercopter. But even while rescuing them, Unity admits to still being drunk, still running all those hospitals and fryers while impaired, still barely maintaining control. Unity says, "It's not like this planet can take its business elsewhere." A joke that reveals Unity knows it's the only thing keeping civilization running and is doing a terrible job of it while intoxicated. Rick's influence on Unity goes beyond just partying. When Summer and Morty confront Rick about his effect on Unity, Rick demonstrates how completely he's taken over the hive mind. He asks Unity what it thinks, and Unity responds through a random person. "I'm just taking a little break from stuff. You know? I need to relax." Then Rick turns up the news, which is also Unity. Unity, as the news anchor says, "This looks a lot worse than it is. We're really just having a good time." Unity, as another news anchor says, "Up next, are you a concerned grandchild or just a buzzkill? We'll tell you how you can really know for sure." Unity is using Planetary media infrastructure to defend Rick's behavior. Unity is broadcasting propaganda to convince Rick's grandchildren that Unity's collapse is actually fine. Unity has become so absorbed in Rick's perspective that Unity is gaslighting teenagers on Rick's behalf using a planet-wide communication network. This is what Unity means by "I lose who I am and become part of you." When Summer makes an emotional appeal, asking Rick to come home as a favor because he loves them, Rick responds, "Summer's just a hyper-emotional, needy little, what's the word I'm looking for here? Human. It runs in the family. I can tolerate it, but I can't give a crap about it." This is Rick at his cruelest, dismissing his granddaughter's feelings completely. But it's also Rick articulating his philosophy about emotional connection. He can tolerate it, but he can't care about it. This is what Unity fell in love with. This is what Unity can't pull away from. After Summer and Morty leave, Rick asks Unity, "Can you assimilate a giraffe?" He's already moving on to the next extreme thing, the next boundary to push, the next way to use Unity's power for his own entertainment. Unity doesn't answer because Unity is already gone. The breakup letter reveals that Unity left while Rick was in the bathroom. Unity couldn't do it face to face because Unity wasn't strong enough. Unity filled the entire planet with copies of the same letter. Every building, every street, thousands or millions of pieces of paper all saying the same thing. This is Unity's version of a cry for help. Unity is using planetary resources to explain why it has to leave, covering every surface with justification because Unity knows Rick will try to argue, will try to convince Unity to stay, will be better at manipulating Unity than Unity is at resisting. Unity's letter explains, "I'm sure there's no perfect version of me. I'm sure I'll just unify species after species and never really be complete." Unity is admitting that assimilation doesn't actually solve anything. Taking over more planets won't make Unity whole. Unity will just keep conquering and consuming and never fill the emptiness. Unity is describing the same void Rick has, the same endless hunger that can never be satisfied. The letter ends with "yours" and nobody else's, Unity, followed by a postscript about getting checked for diseases from the coal miners. Even in the breakup letter, Unity is still taking care of Rick, still warning him about potential health risks, still showing more concern for his well-being than Rick shows for anyone, including himself. Rick returns to Earth and lies to his family. When Beth asks about Unity, Rick says, "Honestly, we're talking about an entity that thrives on enslavement. You know, it's not cool. Fun's fun, but who needs it?" Rick frames Unity as the problem, as something immoral that he's better off without. He doesn't mention that Unity left him. He doesn't mention the letter. He doesn't mention that he drove a planetary consciousness to complete collapse. He just dismisses the whole thing and goes to the garage. What happens next is Rick's suicide attempt. He drains his flask and throws it away. He builds the killing device. He tests it on an alien creature, stroking it while it shrieks helplessly before disintegrating it. Then he positions his own head under the energy blast. The show is drawing a direct parallel. Rick treats himself the way he treats everything else. He sees the aliens suffer and die, and then does the same thing to himself. He falls unconscious at the last second, passing out from the chemicals he drank, and the blast fires over his head. The camera pulls back to show Rick slumped over the desk through the entire night. Morning comes. Jerry shows up and happily weeds the driveway, completely unaware that Rick nearly died 10 feet away. Rick's family has no idea how close they came to losing him. Rick engineered his suicide attempt to look like an accident or a failed experiment so that, even if it succeeded, maybe people wouldn't know it was deliberate. Rick can't even kill himself, honestly. But Unity's suicide attempt is worse, because Unity isn't just one person. The episode never explicitly shows what Unity did after leaving the letter, but the implications are clear from how hive minds work in this universe. When Unity loses control, everybody loses control. When Unity gets drunk, everybody gets drunk. When Unity decides to die, everybody would die. Unity conquered an entire planet. Unity controlled billions of people. Unity ran hospitals and governments and infrastructure and civilization itself. If Unity attempted suicide the way Rick did, it wouldn't just be one body falling unconscious in a garage. It would be billions of bodies simultaneously trying to end their lives. Doctors in hospitals, pilots in aircraft, parents holding children, workers in factories. Every single person Unity assimilated would suddenly be trying to die. The show never depicts this directly because it would be impossible to show without being completely unwatchable. But the logical extension of Unity's breakdown is planetary death. Unity's suicide attempt would mean billions of simultaneous suicides. Unity writing, "I'm not strong enough to do it in persons," suggests Unity couldn't maintain the assimilation while also trying to die. Unity would have to let go of all those bodies, release all those minds, and then each individual person would be left with whatever Unity's final impulse was. The episode cuts away before showing this, but the implications are in Unity's letter. Unity says, "I'm sure I'll just unify species after species and never really be complete." Unity is describing an endless cycle of conquest that doesn't fill the void. Unity has tried being small and being large, tried being a town and being a planet, tried reforming criminals and building civilization and working toward Galactic Federation membership. None of it makes Unity whole. Unity falls in love with Rick, and immediately everything Unity worked toward becomes meaningless. Unity abandons all progress toward becoming a Type 1 civilization. Unity starts manufacturing drugs, bombing cities, losing control of billions of bodies, using people as sex toys, running critical infrastructure while intoxicated, and ultimately collapsing completely. All of this happens in what appears to be a single weekend. Rick shows up on Friday, and by Sunday, Unity has to abandon an entire planet to escape him. Unity's relationship with Rick reveals the same pattern as every other relationship Rick has. Rick doesn't just hurt people, he makes them hurt themselves. Beth stays in a marriage she hates because she's afraid of losing her father. Morty gets dragged across dimensions as a human shield. Summer develops abandonment issues. Jerry gets pushed out of his own family. Even Bird Person, Rick's best friend, ends up shot and nearly killed because of their connection. But Unity is different because Unity is billions of people. Rick's toxicity with Unity doesn't just destroy one relationship, it destroys an entire civilization. Unity spent years becoming a planetary consciousness, reforming criminals, eliminating poverty, building towards something greater. Rick shows up, and Unity throws all of it away for a weekend of chaos. Then Unity has to leave, and the whole planet is left in ruins. The after-credits scene shows Rick tracking Unity down at Beta 7's ship. Rick is drunk and screaming, "Unity, Unity, Unity," through the communication system. Beta 7 responds that Rick is classified as a hostile entity, and Unity doesn't want to talk to him. Rick starts ranting about how Beta 7 is just a shoulder to cry on, how Unity isn't into other hive minds, how Beta 7 will get used and discarded. "A month from now, I'm going to be making out with all of you in a bunch of red wigs." Rick is threatening Beta 7 with the same treatment Unity just escaped. Rick is telling another hive mind that Unity will consume it, use it up, and discard it, exactly what Rick did to Unity. Rick has no self-awareness about this. Rick genuinely believes Unity will come back to him, and the cycle will repeat with someone else getting hurt. Rick sees himself as Unity's inevitable choice, and everyone else as temporary distractions. Beta 7 engages weapon systems. Rick dismisses this. "In your dreams, you have weapon systems." Morty points out that Rick said they were going to a movie. Rick says, "We are Morty," and then tells Beta 7, "You just got saved by the bell, bitch." Rick uses his grandson as an excuse to leave while also saving face. Rick can't admit defeat, so he pretends he was about to do something else anyway. This mirrors Rick's behavior throughout the episode. Rick can't admit vulnerability. Rick builds a suicide machine but passes out before using it. Rick gets dumped but tells his family he ended things. Rick tracks Unity down but pretends he's just messing around. Rick is constantly hiding his actual feelings behind layers of irony and aggression and false confidence. Unity does the same thing. Unity writes in the letter, "Forgive me for doing this," in notes. Unity can't face Rick directly because Unity knows Rick will talk Unity out of leaving. Unity has to completely remove itself from the planet and leave thousands of letters behind because Unity knows one conversation with Rick would undo everything. The suicide attempts from both Rick and Unity happen because they're exactly the same. They're both running from themselves. Rick travels through infinite dimensions trying to escape his dead family. Unity assimilates endless planets trying to feel complete. They're both using external solutions to internal problems. They're both addicts, Rick with alcohol and drugs and chaos, Unity with conquest and control and assimilation. When they meet, they enable each other's worst impulses. Rick encourages Unity to let go and stop trying so hard. Unity gives Rick unlimited power and validation. Together, they create feedback loop of mutual destruction. Unity loses control of billions of bodies. Rick nearly kills himself in his garage. Both of them come within seconds of dying because their relationship is fundamentally toxic. The episode title is Autoerotic Assimilation, a play on autoerotic asphyxiation, the practice of choking yourself during sex. The title suggests that Unity's assimilation is self-destructive, that Unity is slowly killing itself with every conquest. Rick is just the catalyst that makes Unity realize this. Unity was already strangling itself with endless expansion. Rick just made it impossible to keep pretending everything was fine. Unity's collective suicide attempt after losing Rick is the logical endpoint of a hive mind that defines itself by consumption, meeting a person who defines himself by destruction. Unity tried to fill the void by absorbing more beings. Rick showed Unity that the void can't be filled that way. The result was catastrophic collapse for billions of people who had no choice in the matter, followed by Unity attempting to end its own existence because continuing was unbearable. The show cuts away before showing exactly what Unity did, but the framework is clear. Unity left the planet. Unity couldn't maintain assimilation while that emotionally devastated. Unity had to release billions of bodies all at once while experiencing suicidal impulses. The result would have been planetary death on a scale that makes Rick's garage suicide attempt look trivial by comparison. Rick nearly killed one person. Unity nearly killed billions. Both survived. Rick passed out before the blast hit. Unity presumably pulled itself together enough to leave the planet and seek help from Beta 7, but both came terrifyingly close to ending themselves because they couldn't handle being apart. Two beings who claim not to need anyone, who pride themselves on being self-sufficient, who build entire identities around not caring about emotional connection. Endo, both nearly died because a relationship ended. The episode reveals that Rick's nihilism isn't strength, it's desperate fragility. Rick can't handle genuine connection because it hurts too much when it ends. Unity can't handle genuine connection because it requires losing the self completely to another person. Together, they created a relationship where both partners were drowning and pulling each other deeper. The only solution was separation, but separation nearly killed them both. Unity's suicide attempt is never shown directly because it doesn't need to be. The framework is there in every other detail, in the loss of control, in the breakup letter, in the admission of incompletion, in the desperate flight to Beta 7. Unity tried to kill itself after losing Rick because Unity built its entire sense of self around conquest and control, then met someone who was better at controlling Unity than Unity was at controlling anything else. The cognitive dissonance was unbearable. The only escape was death. Rick experienced the same thing but survives through luck and chemicals. Unity presumably survives through the intervention of Beta 7 or through whatever self-preservation instincts a hive mind has. But both came horrifyingly close to ending their existences because they couldn't process the pain of separation. Both revealed that beneath all the power and control and intelligence, they're just desperately lonely beings trying to fill voids that can't be filled from outside. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Morty, burying his own corpse in the backyard. Morty buries his own corpse in the backyard. Morty helps Rick carry 2 corpses through a portal into their new reality. Rick tells Morty to grab himself while Rick grabs himself, saying, "That seems fair to me. I mean, that seems like a fair way to divvy it up." Morty is holding his own dead body, looking at his own mangled corpse, carrying the physical weight of a version of himself that just died violently. They're in the backyard of a house that looks exactly like his own, digging a grave for himself while his family sits inside, completely unaware. The camera shows Morty's hands covered in dirt, shoveling earth over his own face. This is one of the most psychologically disturbing moments in the entire series. And it happens because Rick created a love potion that turned everyone on Earth into grotesque monsters. The setup starts innocently enough. Morty wants Jessica to fall in love with him, so he asks Rick to make a love potion. Rick initially refuses, calling it a poor use of my time and saying it's beneath me. But Morty pushes back for the first time, yelling at Rick that he's always helping with Rick's projects and never gets help with his own problems. Rick gives in and creates a serum using oxytocin extracted from a vole, a rodent that mates for life. Rick combines this with Morty's DNA and hands him the potion, saying, "Whoever you smear this stuff on will fall in love with you, and only you, forever." Morty asks if there are any dangers or side effects. Rick responds, "What am I? A hack? Go nuts, Morty, it's foolproof." Then Rick adds almost as an afterthought, "Unless she has the flu." He shrugs it off. This casual dismissal of a critical detail sets everything in motion. Rick knows the potion could interact with the flu virus, but doesn't consider it important enough to warn Morty properly. Rick's arrogance and carelessness create the conditions for planetary catastrophe. At the school dance, Morty pretends to trip and wipes the potion on Jessica's arm. She immediately becomes infected, pulling him close and saying, "I love you, Morty. I love you so much it burns." Brad interrupts, and Jessica sneezes directly into Brad's mouth, spreading infected bacteria through his bloodstream. The show actually depicts the green spheres of bacteria spreading through Brad's body, through his blood and nerves, transforming him instantly. Brad becomes infected and starts professing love for Morty, grabbing him and squeezing his butt. The infection spreads exponentially from there. Brad sneezes into a punch bowl, then into a ventilation duct. Within minutes, the entire school is infected. Students are ripping off their clothes, singing rap songs about wanting to mate with Morty and feel him inside them, fighting each other for the chance to touch him. The principal and Mr. Goldenfold drag Brad away, but Brad keeps screaming, "I love you, Morty," while sneezing and spreading the virus further. Rick arrives and drags Morty out of the school, explaining that the serum is piggybacking on the flu virus and has gone airborne. Rick says he whipped up an antidote based on praying mantis DNA, because praying mantises are the exact opposite of voles. They mate once, then decapitate their partner. Rick mixed this with a more contagious flu virus to neutralize the love potion. He releases the antidote and the infection mutates. Now everyone doesn't just want to have sex with Morty, they want to eat him afterwards. Morty screams, "This is not okay. Not only do they all want to have sex with me, but now they want to eat me afterwards." Rick admits he doesn't know what he was thinking, that mantises being the opposite of voles was too simple, that DNA is more complicated than that. So Rick creates a third serum, this time mixing koala with rattlesnake, chimpanzee, cactus, shark, golden retriever, and just a smidge of dinosaur. Rick claims this should add up to normal humanity. Morty questions this logic. Rick responds, "What? Morty, you want me to show you my math? I'm sorry. Are you the scientist, or are you the kid that wanted to get laid?" Rick is deflecting responsibility onto Morty, even though Rick is the one creating increasingly reckless solutions. Rick releases the third serum, and the entire human population transforms into horrific monsters, grotesque flesh creatures that the show later identifies as Cronenbergs, named after body horror filmmaker David Cronenberg. The transformation is instant and global. News anchors mutate mid-broadcast. Parents transform while holding their children. Beth's co-worker Davin mutates into a mantis creature while trying to confess his obsession with Morty. sprouting insect limbs and attacking Beth. Jerry has to beat him to death with a crowbar, telling Beth God's turning people into insect monsters. I'm the one beating them to death. Thank me. The entire planet becomes a nightmarish hellscape of shambling meat creatures, all still obsessed with Morty, but now also wanting to consume him. Rick and Morty watch from the ship as the world burns. Rick says, "Boy, Morty, I really Cronenberged the world up, didn't I? We got a whole planet of Cronenbergs walking around down there, Morty. At least they're not in love with you anymore, though." That's a huge step in the right direction. Rick is treating planetary genocide as a minor inconvenience, as progress because at least one specific problem got solved. Morty is horrified, asking how Rick could be so irresponsible. Rick turns it back on Morty, saying all Rick wanted was for Morty to hand him a screwdriver, but Morty wanted Rick to make him a roofie juice serum so he could roofie that poor girl at your school. Rick calls Morty a creep and says Morty is trying to take the high road when Morty is the one who wanted to drug someone into loving him. This is partially accurate. The love potion is essentially a date rape drug that removes consent and free will, but Rick made it anyway, and Rick is the one who failed to properly test it or warn about the flu interaction. Morty accepts his part of the blame, but insists Rick has to accept his part too. Morty says he's not the one who fouled up the serum, who haphazardly mixed nonsense together and created Cronenbergs. Rick agrees they're in a deep hole, but says he has one emergency solution that will put everything back to normal. Rick gives Morty a hazmat suit and says he's going to do some scouting. Rick's solution isn't to fix the current reality. Rick's solution is to find a different reality where another version of Rick successfully cured the Cronenberg infection and restored humanity to normal, then wait for that Rick and Morty to die, then take their places. Rick takes Morty to a reality where they watch themselves through a window. The other Rick is finishing his ionic defibrillator, the device he was working on at the beginning of the episode. That Rick thanks that Morty for handing him a screwdriver, praising Morty for being helpful. That Rick completes the device, which immediately explodes violently, killing both of them instantly. The explosion is graphic. Bodies are torn apart. The other Morty and Rick are ripped to pieces by the blast, dead within seconds. Our Rick opens a portal and steps through with our Morty into the garage where their corpses are still smoking. Morty sees the bodies and screams, "Is that us? We're dead. What is going on, Rick? I'm freaking out." Morty is looking at his own corpse, mangled and burned, lying on the garage floor. Rick tells Morty to calm down. Morty keeps screaming, "I can't deal with this. This can't be real. We're ripped apart." Rick explains that there are infinite realities, and in a few dozen of them, Rick got lucky and turned everything back to normal. Rick just had to find one of those realities, where both Rick and Morty also happened to die around this time. Now they can slip into the place of their dead selves in this reality, and everything will be fine. Rick says they're not skipping a beat, then tells Morty to help with the bodies. Morty says this is insane. Rick says, "I'll grab myself, you grab yourself, okay?" That seems fair to me. That seems like a fair way to divvy it up. Rick is treating the disposal of their own corpses as a simple task distribution problem, as if fairness means each person carries their own dead body. This is Rick's complete detachment from the emotional and psychological weight of what he's asking Morty to do. Morty has to pick up his own corpse. He has to wrap his arms around his own dead body, feel the weight of himself, look at his own face, frozen in death. The body is still warm from the explosion. Morty can see the injuries, the burns, the damage. This is Morty's first direct confrontation with his own mortality in the most visceral way possible. He's not imagining death or fearing it abstractly. He's physically holding the proof that he can die, that he does die, that in infinite realities, he's already dead. They carry the bodies outside to the backyard and start digging. The scene is accompanied by "Look On Down from the Bridge" by Mazzy Star, a melancholy song about distance and isolation and being gone. The lyrics play over images of Morty and Rick shoveling dirt in the backyard while inside the house, Summer, Beth, and Jerry sit together completely unaware. The family is watching TV, talking, living their normal lives, while just outside Morty is burying himself. The visual composition is deliberate. The camera shows Morty through the garage door, small and distant, digging a grave while his family sits in the warm light of the living room. There's a literal and metaphorical separation happening. Morty is outside in the dark doing something horrific and transformative, while his family remains inside in ignorance. They don't know their real Morty is dead. They don't know this Morty is a replacement. They don't know their entire reality was destroyed and abandoned. Morty shovels dirt over his own face. The camera focuses on this moment. Morty looking down at himself, covering his own eyes and mouth with earth, burying his own body in the ground. This is Morty erasing himself, hiding himself, becoming complicit in the cover-up of his own death. He's learning Rick's most important lesson. Nothing matters, everyone is replaceable, and survival means being willing to literally step over your own corpse. Rick doesn't show any emotional response to burying himself. Rick treats it as a practical problem solved. Rick even makes it about himself, telling Morty, "I don't suppose you've considered this detail, but obviously, if I hadn't screwed up as much as I did, we'd be these guys right now. So, again, you're welcome." Rick is claiming credit for getting them killed in another reality so they could survive in this one. Rick is framing his catastrophic failure as a success because he found a way to escape the consequences. But Morty can't escape the psychological consequences. Morty has to live in this house, sleep in that dead Morty's bed, eat meals with a family that doesn't know he's not their original son. Every time Morty looks at the backyard, he knows what's buried there. Every time he sees his mother or sister, he knows they're not technically his mother or sister. His real family is back in a Cronenberg dimension being hunted by flesh monsters. This Morty is an imposter living a stolen life. The episode doesn't show the immediate aftermath, but the implications are clear. Morty has to pretend everything is normal. He has to go to school and see Jessica and act like nothing happened, even though in his original reality, Jessica is a Cronenberg monster who wanted to eat him. He has to do homework and chores and maintain the illusion of continuity, while knowing that continuity is a lie. Every moment of normalcy is built on top of a corpse in the backyard. This experience fundamentally changes Morty. Before this episode, Morty was relatively innocent, naive, optimistic about the adventures. After this episode, Morty starts developing Rick's nihilism and detachment. Morty learns that actions don't have permanent consequences if you can just leave and find a new reality. Morty learns that people are interchangeable, that relationships are arbitrary, that nothing matters because there are infinite versions of everything. The trauma shows up in later episodes. In Ricksty Minutes, Morty comforts Summer by revealing what happened in Rick Potion number 9, telling her, "I had to bury myself," while showing her the grave in the backyard. Summer is horrified, but Morty has integrated the experience into his worldview. Morty uses his own buried corpse as evidence that Summer shouldn't care about not being wanted by her parents because none of it matters anyway. Morty has weaponized his trauma, turned it into a tool for spreading Rick's philosophy. The grave becomes a recurring symbol. Every time the backyard appears in later episodes, that body is still there underground. Every Christmas special, every family barbecue, every time Jerry mows the lawn, Morty's original corpse is decomposing beneath them. The show occasionally references this in Solarix. When realities reset, there's a question about what happens to all the bodies they've buried. The implication is that across infinite realities, there are countless graves containing countless versions of Morty and Rick. But the original grave is the one that matters most because it's the first time Morty had to confront the fact that he's disposable. Rick didn't fix the Cronenberg reality because Rick didn't care enough to try. Rick found it easier to abandon an entire universe and steal someone else's life than to actually solve the problem he created. And Rick made Morty complicit in this abandonment by making Morty carry his own body, dig his own grave, hide his own death. The episode also reveals Rick's emergency contingency plan. Rick says, "It's not like we can do this every week, anyways. We get 3 or 4 more of these. Tops." Rick has a limited number of realities where they successfully fix things but also conveniently die at the right time. This means Rick has been planning for catastrophic failures all along. Rick always knew he might destroy a reality so completely that the only solution would be to abandon it. Rick built reality-hopping escape routes into his life structure. This also means Rick has been willing to let Morty die 3 or 4 times and just replace him with another Morty. Rick's love for Morty is conditional on Morty's availability. If this Morty dies, Rick will find another Morty. If that Morty dies, Rick will find another one. Rick has infinite backup Morties across infinite realities. The specific Morty doesn't matter to Rick beyond convenience. Morty realizes this while carrying his own corpse. Morty realizes he's not special to Rick. Morty realizes that if he had died in the explosion instead of that other Morty, Rick would have just grabbed that other Morty and kept going. Morty is interchangeable. Morty is equipment. Morty is a human shield whose specific identity is irrelevant to his function. The experience also teaches Morty about the weight of consequences. In the abandoned Cronenberg reality, Morty's family is still alive. Summer, Beth, and Jerry are surviving in a nightmare world filled with flesh monsters, armed with weapons, killing mutants to stay alive. The episode shows them briefly, Jerry and Beth fighting together, Summer quoting Jaws, all of them armed and traumatized but bonding as a family. They're in hell because Morty wanted Jessica to like him, and Rick was too arrogant to properly test his solutions. Morty abandoned them. Morty could have stayed and tried to help them survive, but Rick convinced him to leave and steal a new life instead. Now Morty's original family is trapped forever in a destroyed reality, while Morty pretends to be someone else. Every time Morty hugs his replacement mother or talks to his replacement sister, he's betraying his original family. He's choosing the comfortable lie over the difficult truth. The post-credits scene drives this home by showing a Cronenberg reality where the opposite happened. In that reality, Rick successfully turned everyone into Cronenbergs, so the Cronenberg versions of Rick and Morty travel to a reality where everyone is human, describing it as ruining Cronenberg world beyond repair and turning everyone into regular, normal people just walking around. This scene reveals that perspective is arbitrary, that fixing things depends entirely on what you consider normal. But for our Morty, the experience of burying himself creates permanent psychological damage. Morty can't unsee his own corpse. Morty can't unfeel the weight of his own dead body in his arms. Morty can't forget the sound of dirt hitting his own face as he filled in the grave. These sensory memories stay with him forever, creating a foundation of nihilistic detachment that grows stronger with each subsequent adventure. The episode title, Rick Potion Number 9, references a 1959 song about a love potion, but the number 9 also suggests this is just one of many potions Rick has created. There are at least 8 other Rick potions that presumably also went wrong in various ways. This wasn't Rick's first catastrophic failure, and it won't be his last. Rick has been destroying realities and abandoning them for years. Morty is just the latest person Rick has taught to stop caring about consequences. The grave in the backyard represents everything wrong with Rick's philosophy. Rick believes nothing matters because infinite realities mean infinite chances to try again. But the grave proves that things do matter. That specific body is Morty's original self. That specific death marked a permanent change in Morty's psychology. That specific moment of burying himself created trauma that persists across every subsequent adventure. Morty had to dig the hole, lower his own body into it, cover himself with earth, pat down the soil, and walk away knowing he's leaving himself behind. Then Morty had to go inside and eat dinner with a family that isn't his, sleep in a bed that isn't his, live a life that isn't his, all while pretending none of it happened. This is the price of Rick's emergency solution. Morty loses himself permanently, becomes a ghost haunting someone else's life, carries the secret of his own death everywhere he goes. The most disturbing part is how quickly everyone adjusts. Rick immediately goes back to working on his projects. Morty goes back to school. The family continues functioning normally. Within a day or two, it's as if nothing happened. But something did happen. An entire reality was destroyed. Billions of people were transformed into monsters, and a 14-year-old boy had to bury his own corpse in his backyard. The fact that life continues normally afterward is more horrifying than the Cronenberg transformation itself, because it reveals how easily people can absorb and normalize unspeakable trauma when they have no other choice. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next video.